Hello, my name is Lindsay. I'm a 19-year-old female living in Pennsylvania with my parents and two of my sisters. We live in a rural area, and there isn't much that goes on out here. I listen to your stories every single morning at work and always wish I had a scary story of my own to share. Well, tonight, I got my own frightening tale. To preface the story a bit, my older sister and I have been hiking once before this experience, so we are not pros by any means. However, we always bring some safety items such as pocket knives, flashlights, and a medical kit. For this story, I will not be using my sisters' names for their anonymity. My older sister will be called Mary, and my younger sister will be referred to as Farrakha. So it was Farrakha's birthday, and she has never really been hiking. So we figured we would bring her on a little hiking trip to take advantage of the beautiful weather. The area we walked at prior is part of the state game lands. Hikers are permitted on the mountain trails during the off-season of hunting. However, not many folks know about this spot because there are no signs or anything until you walk the mile or so into the woods. By then, you reach a small parking lot of sorts that's usually empty. There are two main trails with the occasional blue dot on a nearby tree. If not for these spray paint dots to mark the path, you might not ever know that this was a trail because of how little use it really gets. Probably not the best first hiking spot for a couple of newbies like us. I know. It's super close to us and makes for a quiet hike with lots of scenery. So we decided to hike that trail again because we were somewhat familiar with it. We were excited and ready to have a nice relaxing walk through the mountain and hopefully get some cool pictures. We started walking from our house to the bottom of the hill, where we would begin our hike. On our way there, we were telling Farrakha about the trail and how beautiful it was. Mary then expresses concern that there could be animals of all sorts nearby because not many people live in this area. It's usually a site where animals would be, of course. It is woods after all. Still, I never imagined anything like what I'm about to describe would happen. After walking for about 15 minutes or so, we reached the parking lot. Mary leads the way, with me in the middle and Farrakha following closely behind. The first few steps onto the trail require walking up a small but steep hill. Mary crested the hill before Farrakha and me, and as she did, we heard a loud rustling noise to our left. I naturally chalked the noise up to some birds or maybe a squirrel messing around in the trees. But then, Mary suddenly stopped in her tracks, causing Farrakha and me to pause briefly. Just as I was about to ask her what the problem was, Mary calmly said, "Turn around, guys." Farrakha and I looked at her, confused and not understanding what she meant. I started asking why, and she said probably the scariest thing I have ever heard. "There is something over there. Run." Now, that sentence was a lot more difficult for Farrakha and me because we know Mary very well and she doesn't scare easily. So to hear the apparent panic in her voice as she ordered us to run away from something that neither Farrakha nor I saw was terrifying. Mary and Farrakha immediately started sprinting back down the small hill as I was still standing in my place. I quickly looked behind me, but I didn't see anything. I did hear something, though. I was still baffled because I had not seen anything, and Mary never said what she saw. I ran over to Mary and Farrakha, who were waiting for me just before the entrance to the parking lot. I think part of the reason I hesitated to run right away was because I thought Mary might have been exaggerating a little. I should have known by the look on her face that she was not messing around. I had a miniature hatchet multi-tool and pocket knife on my belt, and you better believe I had them at the ready. I had no idea what I was expecting, but I knew whatever might run out of the woods behind us would get a face full of stainless steel. When I reached my sisters, I asked Mary where we were running from. She told us to keep moving as she constantly looked back at the trail that we had just come from. She even told us to jog just in case it followed us. We did. After flying a quarter mile, Mary finally told us what we were running from. She said she looked in the direction of the noise we had all heard and saw a huge gray figure hunched over about 10 feet off the trail. She described it to be at least the height of Farrakha, around 5'6". It had long, gray, patchy-looking hair and/or fur. She said it looked bipedal, but she didn't stick around long enough to take in every detail about the figure. However, She did note that it looked like it was shuffling toward us. I believe that made her get us out of there so fast. She must have feared that we were going to be chased. I have never believed in monsters or cryptid, but Mary said she honestly has no idea what that thing was. We don't have any animals in Pennsylvania that match that description, at least as far as I know. I know that black bears sometimes stand on their hind legs, but they are not gray, and it didn't sound big enough to be a bear. The only other thing it might have been was maybe a human, but why would someone be dressed like that, and why would they hear us distressed and not call out to us and let them know that they were not a threat? Maybe someone was doing drugs and was scared they would be busted. I don't know. I swear I've gone through every scenario. I don't know if I believe in Bigfoot or anything like that, but who knows? When we were almost home, Mary told us that she used to go to the bus stop with two of the neighbor kids years ago. She said that they would always walk, and they would hear this mysterious animal. Sometimes they would see it walking around the woods near their house, which is very close to the state game lands. They described it the same way, and said that it definitely looks like it's some sort of ape creature. At first, she did not believe them because she had never seen such a thing herself. But once, when the neighbor kid's grandmother was with them at the bus stop, Mary asked about this mysterious animal. The grandmother has always been religious and didn't seem to be the type to believe in something like these Bigfoots. But, to Mary's surprise, the grandmother said she also had witnessed the mysterious animal lurking around. Moreover, our house is just across the lawn from where our neighbors claimed to spot this unknown Bigfoot creature. I'm not sure if these two experiences are related. Besides, that was many, many years ago. But could the figure Mary encountered in the woods tonight be the mystery animal they saw all those years ago? Maybe it was a human or an animal. Who knows for sure? But what I do know is, I don't think I'll ever be hiking on the state game lands anytime soon. When I was 21 years old, I decided to go out with a bunch of friends in the woods. We decided to hang out after dark. Now we all had booze and flashlights. Two of us had guns and I had my knife. The walk was long through the woods to get to a cliff with a beautiful view to see the sunset, and we were going to drink and get high. Nothing too major, just some weed. We got to the spot with no problem, and at the top of this cliff, there was a big rock you could stand behind, and nobody would see you. So we sat on the cliff, our backs to the rock and the forest behind the rock. We have a friend, let's call him Jeff. He got up and said that he had to take a pee. We told them to be careful as it was getting dark, and there were cougars and bears in the woods, so I told them to hurry up and be quick, and if anything happened, scream. So he went behind the rock, and we could hear him start to do his business. We were all just sitting there smoking and drinking, when suddenly we heard this loud, almost ear-piercing screech. We all thought it was a mountain lion, so we went to check on Jeff. He was standing there with his pants down around his ankles, this bewildered look on his face, and he had looked white as a ghost. It was almost like he had seen one. We were looking around and we noticed this vast gaping hole in the forest where we could hear something running away. This hole was easily 7 or 8 feet tall, and about 3 or 4 people across. It was enormous. There was no way a bear or a cougar could have made a hole like that, and the sounds of the thing running away almost sounded like a Bigfoot or something. It was so heavy and forceful. Interestingly enough, in the area where I lived, we have tales of something called the Mogollon Monster, which is like a Bigfoot in a sense. This creature is 7 or 8 feet tall and very big, and no one has ever gotten a good look or picture of it. We don't know what happened to that night as Jeff refuses to talk about it, and we don't know what he saw. Some of us chased after it. It was running so freaking fast. It was much quicker than us, and we were gunning it. It got away because we didn't know what it was, what happened, or what Jeff saw. We can only assume that something else was out there that night, and it scared the bejesus out of us. Hello, my name is Clara. I've been a big fan of the show for quite some time. I live in the upper state of Michigan, and I love to hike and camp along with some hunting. I went out one day with my stepdad to go hunting so we could catch some deer and whatnot. Once we got out to where we were hunting, we packed up the gear we had brought from our house. I smelled something foul, like a pile of garbage or rotting fish mixed with some lousy body odor. We ignored it as we thought it was something dead lying nearby. We made our way through the woods onto a beaten-down path that we had found. Once we got quite a ways down it, we stopped and took a couple of minutes to take a break. We heard a massive crack in the background behind some large bushes, like something had broken a big branch. My stepdad instinctively grabbed his sidearm from his holster, which is when whatever it was growled at us and sped off. Whatever it was, it sounded big and very quick. We ignored it and hiked even faster to where we needed to go. Once we got there, we set up camp and started to make lunch. We had a hot dog and a side of salad. As we ate, I began to smell that putrid smell again, almost making me vomit my food. I had to pee, so I went off. With it being near dusk, I grabbed a flashlight and a hunting knife that I had brought with me. I squatted down as I was about to take a pee until I saw something move in the distance. I shined my flashlight at whatever was moving. I could see orange or red glowing eyes shining as I became frightened. I pulled my pants back up and ran back to the camp. I told my dad what had happened and he went to check it out. After a couple of minutes, I heard a scream in the direction my dad had walked off. He ran back panicking. He had blood oozing down his knee. I asked him what had happened, but he stayed in silent mode. He packed our stuff as fast as possible and walked quickly back to the truck. Once we got halfway there, we heard a loud call from something that I had never heard before. At that moment, we started running as fast as we could, nearly tripping over roots and rocks, until after a couple of minutes or so, we finally made it back to our truck, packed everything in the back, and sped out of there like a bat out of hell. We came home and went to sleep, but before that, I saw his knee, and it looked like a big rock had hit it. We take our 2 dogs outside to their kennels so they can get out of the house for a while and run and play. These are not small dogs. One is a black lab husky mix, and the other is a full-blooded Staffordshire Terrier, or a pit bull. The kennels are placed at the edge of the yard near the woods. These woods are oversized, large enough to take a day to go hiking through them. Lately, when it gets dark, the dogs seem on edge. They will bark and whine toward the house to come in. At first, I thought they just wanted to get back into the house, but now I think they're actually scared. 3 nights ago, when I went to get them, it was already pretty dark, but we have a security light, so it's not like it's pitch black or anything. I got to the front of the first kennel and noticed both dogs were absolutely silent. They constantly bark at me excitedly when I go to them, but they are dead silent this time. This weirded me out a little, but not to the point of being scared. I will admit that there was a certain uneasiness in the air though, something I can't quite explain, but it's sort of like an electric feeling, like I was about to be shocked. The longer I was there, the more uneasy I felt. I started getting out the first dog, the lab, and heard a heavy snap in the woods near the kennels. I froze. The dogs froze. By this time, I was so on edge that if someone had spoken, I would have jumped, screamed, and possibly ran for my entire life. The creepy feeling in the air just kept getting thicker. The lab had put her bushy tail stuffed underneath her and was whining. This didn't make me feel any better. The pit bull was as far away from the woods as she could be, whimpering for me to come get her. I can only take 1 dog in at a time because they get too excited and sometimes try to fight, so I avoid that at all cost. I felt so bad leaving the pitty there by herself, but I had to do it. As I walked away, she barked this high-pitched whining type of bark at me that I had never heard her do before. The lab could not get to the house quick enough. I went back for the other one and dreaded every step as her door was to the base of the woods. I would have to turn my back to the woods to open her door and get her out. As I approached the kennel, the air felt heavy and stale, with an unpleasant smell like a dead skunk. Another snap and I was ready to run for it, but I didn't want to leave my dog, who had her head defensively facing the woods. I could barely make it. It felt like trying to walk through water. I was terrified. By the time I reached the door, I heard heavy breathing behind me as I got my dog out. She was scared, but started growling behind me. I was frozen in place. The breathing continued for at least a minute before I heard steps coming toward us. We both took off at the same time. A terrifying scream came from the base of the woods. I didn't dare look back. I just ran. My pity pulled me back to the house. I got in, flipped off all the lights, and stared out the window at the woods. I could see something moving slightly, but just out of my sight. It moved back and forth about 5 times, then disappeared. It took me forever to fall asleep because I was so scared that every little noise freaked me the heck out. The next night I went to get the dogs earlier. Right around dusk, I thought all was good until I was getting my pity out. A very loud snapping sound rang out as a tree branch had just been snapped in half. It sounded far away, so I hurriedly got my dog and started walking toward the house. A few steps from the kennel, I heard something big that started charging toward me from inside the woods. We ran again, which appeared to follow for so long, then retreat. Now, every night since then I hear sounds coming out of the woods like branches breaking and being thrown around, knocking on trees and roaring. I am terrified. I no longer take my dogs down there. I take them for walks instead during the day and make sure we are all in before dusk. I don't know what to do. I'm thinking about buying a gun, but I'm not sure it will help. This story takes place during my first year being on the force. I was 19 years old at the time, and I was stationed at another community called Waswanipi. Waswanipi is in a swampy area, and it was a summer night. We got a call from a bar roughly about 30 minutes away from us. The bar is on the side of a road in a not-so-great area of this town. To keep the lives of the people who live in this small town normal, I won't name it. So it was my partner and I who responded to the call and drove for about 15 to 20 minutes. I was the one driving the car and had headlights on, the high beams. As we were going, we spotted something lying in the middle of the road. And this thing was big. At first, I thought it was a moose. It's not uncommon for moose to lay on the road because of the heat and mosquitoes. They tend to lay on the road and try to cool off. I started braking the car so hard that the tires screeched and whatever was lying there got up quickly. This thing was towering over the car. We are usually equipped with Tahoes and Suburbans. These are big SUVs, and I'm not sure if it was because of our lights. Still, it looked like this thing had red eyes looking down at us. I've never felt so scared when I saw its eyes, but the thing roared at us and ran away, which was far too fast to be any normal creature. My partner was paralyzed with fear when I was telling him to call backup, so I had to call it in myself, and I remember trying to explain to dispatch what we encountered without sounding crazy. Still, after about 15 minutes or so, our backup finally arrived. We checked out where the thing ran to, and honestly, even with the backup, I didn't feel safe at all because this thing was huge. We had Glocks, and pistols don't do shit to these things. Now you can imagine how I felt with this gun, knowing that this guy couldn't bring down a bear on its own, and this thing was much more significant than a bear and a moose. We walked a couple of meters away to investigate what we encountered. After a few meters, we saw this thing knocking down trees. We decided to walk back to our cars. You could tell every single one of us was shaken up. I swear walking back to the cars I heard knocking on the trees. After returning to the cars, I thought to myself, if we had continued following the trail this thing was leaving behind, what would have happened to us if we re-encountered it? A few days later, people reported seeing it from Waswanipi to Sanitaire. In conclusion, I firmly believe I saw a Bigfoot that night. Quick side story. When I was younger, I stayed with my grandparents, and my grandfather had a friend who came over to visit us. He told me a folk tale or a myth, whatever you would like to call it. He said that Bigfoots were common before the colonial days and would attack native camps and take children. But apparently, every native tribe would come together and have war with the Bigfoots, and they kept it a secret when the colonizers came. That's why there are fewer sightings. I'm not sure if he was telling me the truth or lying to scare me, but it kind of makes sense. Well, the occasional sightings part. That's just me. I was 27 years old and working at a Boy Scout camp far up in the woods of Northern California. Where I worked had a large population of black bears, which for the most part were relatively harmless and easy enough to scare away with a shot from a rifle. However, we had many Boy Scouts at this camp weekly, sometimes as many as 500 heads, and with a lot of vastly spread out campsites, there are going to be a few campers who sleep with candy bears in their pockets and make themselves a prepackaged dinner snack for a bear. I tell you this because black bears love Reese's peanut butter cups. As part of the staff often, I was scheduled for bear watch and strolled the entirety of the camp with a rifle, going from site to site making my presence known to ensure that bears would not come anywhere nearby. On one of these routine nights, everything was more still and quiet than usual, and I remember finding it rather odd and unsettling. I had just checked in on the camp the furthest away from all the other campsites. It was a good half-mile away from the base proper. As I'm strolling along the trail and the runs beside the lake, I stopped to take a number 1 and light a joint that I had stashed away for such an occasion of being out by the lake at 2 in the morning. As human beings, we have natural gut feelings we must always adhere to for survival. There was a gut feeling I had something was amiss. Not only was it unusually still and quiet, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched and was certainly not alone. I nervously took a few puffs from my J and then put it out, now more aware of the unnerving sense in the air. I have been face to face with a bear before. Even a mountain lion has stalked me. I've slept a little too close to the den of a coyote before as well. But this was different. I didn't sense that I was in the presence of anything like that. The smell was absolutely overwhelming. It did not smell like any bear I've ever experienced. It was almost sour but still musky. I'll never forget the smell, but I can never find the words to describe it adequately. As I reached for my flashlight before considering readying my rifle, a massive boom hit the ground, falling from the trees above and nearly knocking me on my ass from the sheer force of it. I reached for my flashlight and had fallen to the ground. I reached for my flashlight that had fallen to the ground as I heard something significant, something massive, running away from me into the tree line up into the hill above. Immediately, I considered it probably the biggest bear I had ever come across, and black bears can be spooked rather easily, so I considered myself lucky. But as I lay there, hyperventilating, shaking, and quaking in my boots, I started to feel the sound of the beast running away. It didn't sound like the stride of a black bear in flight. It sounded bipedal. It sounded human. I braced, stood up, and readied my rifle, released the safety, and shot upward toward the lake. It woke up many campers and scout leaders alike. I stood alone for 10 minutes before the camp leader and some other staff came to me. During that time, I had my flashlight out and was inspecting the scene. Whatever it was that had dropped from the branches above fell from possibly 20 feet, and in its wake of running away, had torn off limbs into the hill. Some of these limbs stood more than 13 feet off the ground, and some smaller trees were bent almost down into the ground. I have never seen a bear do that, that's for sure. Everyone was stumped when some of the staff and some concerned campers arrived. Most campers, to comfort themselves, insisted it was just a bear. I do know this though. No bear running on all fours stands 13 feet tall, and no bear can run on 2 feet for 12 yards uphill on 2 legs. They just don't do that. We were all thinking about it, so I'll say it. I think I encountered a Sasquatch that night. If not, I don't know what the heck that thing was. But I'm glad it was running away from me and not at me, because whatever that thing was, beast or man, it was gargantuan. and I would not have stood a chance if it had decided to confront me. I live on a rural, indigenous reservation in Alberta, Canada. I'm familiar with stories of the Wendigo, shapeshifters, and skinwalkers. But my only encounter will always stick with me, and I vividly remember all the details of my experience. It was spring of 2020. The pandemic was just getting into effect. We were all stuck at home at the time. But one night around 3 a.m., I went to have a cigarette. I cracked our balcony door and stood inside as it was still chilly outside. The snow was starting to melt. It was a full moon that night. It was so bright outside, and with all the snow, the moonlight reflection made everything merry and vivid. I lit my cigarette and heard what sounded like a chopping sound, almost like stones or something solid being thrown against a tree. The forest is all around my house. I quite literally live in the middle of nowhere. The sound was coming from my neighbor's horse's field. It caught my attention, so I focused on that area. That's when I heard footsteps in the snow. It wasn't like an animal trotting, but more like human footsteps. Gazing off in the distance, I saw something pacing around the vehicles. I thought it was maybe an intruder, somebody trying to rob us, but my gut feeling took over, and I had this eerie, unnatural feeling about this. I will admit that I was a little bit intoxicated at the time, so I was second guessing that I may have been seeing things, but to be honest, I had only had a few drinks and definitely wasn't drunk or anything like that. But with the moonlight shining down, I knew whatever this thing was had been pacing around, and then it saw me. This thing stands up on two legs and ran when it saw me. It got about 50 meters from where I was standing. This creature lunged at me and made a growl I had never heard before. It all happened so fast, but when it lunged at me, the moonlight showed how greasy this thing's skin was. This creature had long hair. It was jet black with yellow teeth and eyes. It somewhat resembled a wolf, but it was much more significant, and the way it growled was unnatural. The way it lunged at me was supernatural. It was almost as if this thing could jump on the roof of a 2-story house with ease. And the smell. It smelled like rotting garbage. I have never been so scared in my entire life. It all happened so fast, but I vividly remember this detail. When people use the term "my heart dropped," that's a very real thing. I threw my smoke and slammed the door shut. My entire body trembled, and I felt like my heart was going to fall out of my stomach. I was vibrating and shaking and trying to get myself together. I was trying to rationalize my thoughts about what had just happened. I have never been so scared in my entire life. I sat in the living room in darkness. Rethinking about what just happened, I felt like I was being watched the entire time. This was my dad's house and my room was in the basement. There was no way in hell I was going downstairs. I calmed down the best I could and made a bed on the living room couch upstairs. At that point, I was even thinking, maybe I'm just tripping out and seeing things. Then I kept hearing tapping alongside the house. My house is stucco, which almost sounded like nails on a chalkboard. I was scared all over again, frozen in fear. The front door to the house is on the 2nd story, so there's a flight of stairs outside leading to the balcony and front entrance. I heard something run up the staircase and pace around the front porch. We use sage and smudge to ward off evil energy in my culture. However, me being slightly intoxicated at the time, it is frowned upon to use it while under the influence. But this was an emergency. I was scared for my life. So I lit the sage and smudged myself and the entire upstairs of my house. Just as I was starting to feel at ease and even started to second guess myself again, I saw what was definitely making those noises I was hearing outside. And this pain of being watched came back. Then I got towards the front entrance with my smudge pan still burning. As I peered outside, the thing was standing on 2 legs at the foot of the staircase. And it laughed. It laughed at me. And not a regular laugh, but like a hyena or some weird immortal animal laugh. At that point, I knew what I experienced was real. I ran into my dad's room where he was sleeping and shook him awake. I was in complete darkness. I was crying and my voice was shaking. I was shaking uncontrollably, and I told him everything that happened that night. His response was typical, asking how much I drank and if I did any drugs. It made me feel like a crazy person and even a little humiliated. It made me feel like a crazy person and even had me feeling a little humiliated. But the fear I had in my eyes was almost as if he said that to try to bring a reasonable explanation to comfort me. Because he gave me his eagle feather and said, "Put this under your pillow and pray for protection from our ancestors and to the Creator." After doing so, I could finally sleep on the couch upstairs. The following day when I woke up, I once again thought to myself if everything I'd experienced was real. I didn't want to believe that the whole experience was indeed authentic, until I went outside and I saw where the thing had lunged at me in the snow. And where it landed, there were 4 big paw prints. It wasn't regular paw prints like a dog or a wolf would have left. These things had claw marks and they almost looked human. It was massive too. It was almost twice the size of my hand. I just looked at those prints for a good while. My heart stopped and my body became heated as if I was about to faint. I was too scared to even show my dad or take a picture because I didn't want to make notes or document pictures because I was scared doing so would make it return. My only reaction was to cover up the tracks and place protection around my yard. I got utterly sober after that experience. Thankfully, I've never had an encounter like that again, and the way my dad reacted when I woke him and told him what happened, I never told anybody else about this experience because I didn't want to sound crazy. But I saw those prints. They were real. It all happened. I even have goosebumps writing this story. I hope you feature this story, Swamp Dweller. I've been a long-time subscriber, and have finally dared to share my story with what I believe was a skinwalker. Keep up the excellent work. Hello, my name is Daniel, and I've been deciding whether or not I should share my encounter with your show for quite some time. I believe what I experienced were multiple skinwalkers, so please enjoy because this is going to be a long story but a good one, and I promise you it's true. So, one day about 2 months ago, my friends and I were talking about cryptids and trying to hunt one down and get it on camera. So, one of my friend's brothers, whom I will call Chris, decided to plan a trip into the field. So, I told him we could go hunting for whatever we would see in the dark with a flashlight and a GoPro. So fast forward 2 days, I get to his house, and we smoke a little Mary J before heading out to our journey. So we get to the field, right down the road, and it just so happens to be the spot where I feel creeped out when I'm alone, riding my bike home. So we get out our flashlights, and we go to the middle of the field by the wood line, and I told him that if we were going to get anything on camera, our best bet would be to go into the woods. So we walk further down and go into a brush of thorns and trees. So we pick a spot to sit and wait for something to happen. After around 10 minutes or so, we had heard nothing until a random and unexplainable noise that honestly would sound like something running bipedally started to happen by the tree line. Then 2 more minutes go by, and we hear what sounded like an enormous bird flapping its wings above the trees. "What the hell is that?" I asked Chris. But before he could say anything, it sounded like a crowd of 20 deer running by the tree line simultaneously. So Chris looked back at me, and I said, "Screw that, bro, we have to get out of here." I know, so much for being a cryptid hunter. So we got up after the noises stopped and we walked a couple of feet. My heart dropped because I heard what sounded like a massive tree breaking not even 15 feet from where we stood. I told my friend that we have to go now, and then darted through the brush and out of the woods through the field. This is when I got my first glimpse of what looked like 4 glowing orange eyes in the trees. And so, we then walked because my friend told me that we should act like we didn't see anything. But then I got the bright idea to look back from where we had came from, and I saw what I only thought was an old lady in a white dress standing in the spot that we were standing. As we were walking down to the end of the street, I finally told Chris what I had saw and said, "Did you see it too?" To my surprise, he said yes, and we kept on walking. As I looked back, this time, whatever that thing I saw in the white dress was running at us in full sprint. But now, it was not a woman. It was clearly some sort of bipedal creature that I can't even begin to explain. We ran like hell back to our house, shut the door, and hoped that thing wouldn't come in the house because we locked everything. One of the deadbolts though were broken at the time, and we were waiting for a repairman to come fix it. We tried to avoid going into the woods after that event, and honestly, I've been pretty good about avoiding them, especially at night. I don't honestly know if this was a skinwalker or a group of them or whatnot, but those glowing eyes from the woods, petrifying, orange, and downright menacing. I don't know how to explain it other than the stories that I've heard from this channel based on skinwalkers. I'm not the type to believe in this stuff, mainly because I'm not very superstitious. But these two encounters made me doubt whatever was going down on my farm. The first encounter occurred when two friends and I were having dinner. Everything was calm. We ate outside since this was a relatively ample space. That was until we heard a woman scream, which was extremely odd since the country I live in is very calm, with very few criminals or even animal attacks. Since we were in the wilderness, I found that to be relevant. I was the first one to react. I climbed to the wall separating the house grounds from the animals. From there, I could see almost all of the houses near mine. My friends got up right after me. We stayed in total silence, waiting for another scream, and we heard it. This time we could understand what was said. It was a very high-pitched, "Help!" She yelled this multiple times, and then a bunch of gibberish no one could understand. One of my friends quickly grabbed the phone to call the police, as we assumed it would be some sort of domestic violence or robbery. I held my axe, and my other friend followed me to the gate. We didn't leave because nobody knew what we would find, since something sounded odd about those screams, and not quite right. Right before the police arrived, we heard a thud and glass breaking. I assume it was a window. The screams stopped as soon as the police arrived, never to be heard again. The police found nothing of note. Later that night, my friends and I stayed up chatting about what had happened. One of them was oddly quiet. When I asked him what was wrong, he said, "I've heard those screams before." He claimed he had heard that same type of scream before while walking his dog. The next day, we got up and decided to check the house the screams were coming from. But there was one weird thing about it when we arrived at the place. There was no house. It was a forest, just trees upon trees and bushes everywhere. We returned and decided to forget what had happened since it was not a good time and we were trying to have some good vibes. It would take many years for someone to relate this encounter with a skinwalker. I know I didn't at first, but when it happened twice, I started connecting everything. The second encounter happened when my cousins were over. Like the previous night, we had a good, peaceful dinner. That's when my cousin and I decided to go for a little walk in the garden that I had. It was made of the frontier with a vast forest, only separated by a small stone wall. We were walking and talking and laughing and having a good time when I started to hear a man talking. Not in a normal voice. It sounded like there was something in his throat that produced a weird frequency. Again, I grabbed my axe and called my cousin and his sister. We got near the wall to hear what he was saying. Like the first encounter, we could only understand gibberish coming from him, and it just wouldn't stop talking. It kept going on and on and on, not even taking breaks to catch their breath. After listening to it, we realized we couldn't do anything about it, so we left and finished our dinner. They go home, and I find myself alone here. It was unsettling, and then I start overthinking more and more, and I remember the times my dog would spend entire nights barking at the forest when all the existing animals were wiped out by hunters. I remember the warnings my parents gave me when I was a child. Always leave the forest and lock the doors before sunset. Regardless of my questions, they would never tell me why because, as I mentioned before, it was a quiet little location in a peaceful country. I couldn't understand why so many worries were to be had. But this all ended when the loggers came to cut down all the grown trees, leaving the forest visible. Before the trees were cut down, you couldn't see anything in there, even during the daytime. After they cut the trees and the excellent weather came, nothing weird happened, and my dog stopped barking at the wall. I would like to know if I was being paranoid, or if I really was potentially having encounters with a skinwalker, or something similar. I've always been interested in the paranormal and unexplained since I was a young kid after having experienced what I believed to be a black eye kid. But that's another story for another day. This story took place when I was 15 or so in Middle Tennessee. Back then, I was going through my edgy phase, as we all do, and I thought it was cool to go into the woods alone and blow off steam and whatnot. I spent a lot of time with my grandma as my dad worked 6 days a week and didn't feel comfortable leaving me home alone, since we lived in a sort of sketchy meth head town, whereas my grandma lived in a relatively more peaceful area out in the boonies, if you would. She owns a suitable few acres of land, and if you go far enough into the woods, this beautiful waterfall leads to an underground spring. One day I was going back there, trekking the land I knew like the back of my hand at that point, enjoying the peacefulness the wilderness had to offer. After going uphill for some time, when it starts going downhill, there's this clearing that will take you straight to the waterfall. Watching my feet as I walked, always cautious not to step on a copperhead, I came to the hill to the clearing. Right at the bottom of the mountain, something unusual caught my eye. It took a second to realize what I was staring at, but it was the skeleton of a deer, freshly killed. Now, I usually wouldn't overthink this, but something felt off about this. There was no rotted skin or signs of flesh anywhere. These bones still had fresh blood but no sign of skin or anything. My young teenage mind tried to process this, but I couldn't think of any predator that lived in this area that would strip a deer like this, and no hunter would dump the bones in this area because this was not an area where hunters were known to hunt. The moment I realized this was all wrong, a sense of impending doom washed over me. My fight or flight kicked in. It felt like the trees and ground all around me and even above me were moving, shaking like something was coming towards me. I took off as quickly as I could, not even looking behind me, but I could sense that something there was chasing after me. I heard the twigs and sticks break under the weight of something behind me, running fast after me. I don't think I've ever ran that fast in my life. Once I was out of the clearing of the woods and back in my grandma's backyard, the feeling of safety washed over me. I don't know what was in those woods that day, but I didn't hike back there alone ever again. After reading stories and hearing a bunch of episodes on the Swamp Dweller channel, I really do think this might fit the Skinwalker category, but I would love to know if anybody in the comment section has another idea. This is a story my friend shared with me recently. Apparently this happened to him around last Halloween. I'm a security guard stationed at a gigantic shopping mall with a few other security guards. I went off to my area while the others went to theirs. I started to do my rounds going into shops at around the central part of the mall. It was getting close to Halloween, so the mall was relatively packed. Then that's when I noticed the cloaked figure coming towards me smoothly. It bumped into me as it passes me. I felt the feeling us security guards never really feel. Fear and evil. I made a call out to it to see if it would respond. "Hey, you, stop there," I yelled. Nothing in return. It was like it didn't even acknowledge that I was there. So I followed it to see where it was going. It stopped and turned slightly to see if it was being followed. Then it continued going. But the pursuit was cut short by an elderly Asian man falling down in a shop. As the nice guy I am, I had to go help them. I turned back to where the cloaked figure was, but it wasn't there anymore, like it vanished in thin air. I went to go have my break. When I was about to walk through the door, I ran into Rex, my friend. "Hey, did you happen to see some sort of cloaked figure walking around?" I said. Rex went white and said, "Yeah, and this time it was looking at me." We both sat down and never brought up the cloaked figure again. We don't know if it was a person in a costume or a member of some unknown cult, so I ate my lunch and headed back out. Later that afternoon, as it turned into night, the people started to get thin and the shops started to close. When it was dead as a doornail, my night shift began. I hopped on my cart, fired up the belt driver, and started doing my rounds on the bottom floor. It was pitch black only until the spotlight on the cart lit up a bit. The darkness isn't the only thing I should be worrying about. That cloaked figure is probably still around the mall somewhere. Then I heard a sound, like something was laughing. But it wasn't a normal laugh, it was distorted, childlike laughter. It went off in several places around me. It was taunting me like little kids do to adults. But the mall was closed, meaning there was no one here. "Who's there?" I yelled. The laughing stopped, and the mall fell silent again. Then suddenly there was a loud bang from the second floor that scared me. So I headed to the escalator, went up to the second floor. As I rounded the corner, I noticed the vending machine, walking down and saw some black mass next to it. I shone my light on it, and I noticed it was the rear end of a grizzly bear. A gigantic grizzly bear bigger than any I have ever seen. The thing froze as the light hit it, and it slowly turned to face me. The front of the gigantic creature was that of a bobcat with glowing red eyes and long fangs, and the back was that of a bear. The creature rose on its hind legs, making it about 7 to 8 feet tall. It held its bobcat paws in the air out to balance its body. I could feel its red eyes looking right into my soul. "Who's there?" it said in a distorted version of my own voice, letting out a god-awful screech after. I was terrified. I jumped into the cart and sped all the way to the entrance and ran outside. I have never seen this thing since that incident, and I have no idea what it was. But after reading many stories, I believe this has to be some sort of skinwalker. I have no other explanation. I know that you get sent tons of stories like this, and this may be anticlimactic, but I have never heard of an animal that looks like the front half is a bobcat and the last half is a bear. And not only that, but it was overgrown to all hell. My Scary Encounter with a Creature in the Woods by JJ Beh 21. At midnight one night, I decided to go outside and hop in my hot tub. As soon as I got outside, I realized it was very silent. And if you know anything about the woods, they are never quiet. I was in my hot tub for around 30 minutes when I heard an animal approaching about 30-ish feet away, right on the other side of my wooden fence. I brush it off as just being a deer, and I continue chilling until I listen to its steps. Then I start thinking that it couldn't be a deer, as the steps were bipedal, and it sounded far too big. I'm talking about 300 to 400 pounds hefty. And then I realized that it was hovering around 4 feet or so. So, with one step, and it started sounding bipedal, that's when I started to feel like it wasn't just watching me. It was getting closer. I soon confirmed this when I heard it start walking back the way it came. And then it kept doing this, like it was going back and forth. Remember, this was only about 20 feet away from me, so I could listen to which direction it was going to fairly easily. Anyway, I only had brought my phone with me, so I kept trying to see if I could see it with my flashlight. Of course, it was too far away, but all I wanted was to see at least a slight silhouette. As I said, I was terrified, so when I couldn't see anything past 8 feet, I just sunk my head into the hot tub to where only my ears and face were out, trying to hide if I could, thinking maybe it would go away. This would only appear to make things much worse on my end as I heard it cross the fence and begin to walk up to the side of my house and towards the hot tub. It came within a couple of feet of me, before it went back to the fence, and then started going back and forth with those significant steps once more. At this point, I stood up in the water and tried to see it with my phone flashlight before I heard one of my dogs' barks in the mudroom across the house. I then jumped out of the hot tub and sprinted, fearing for my life. As I got inside, I dried off and told my mom, who
who was sitting on the couch that something was watching me outside. I then checked on the 2 pit bulls and Great Dane in the mudroom and realized they were cowering in the corner, scared of whatever was outside. Keep in mind, these are big dogs, so it takes a lot to frighten them like that. I grabbed a flashlight and a shotgun. I loaded them with slugs and forced my dogs outside. The Great Dane would not leave no matter what, but I managed to get the other 2 out. Then I heard it again, but this time it was adjacent to the door, walking sideways around 40 to 60 feet uphill. I live in the Rocky Mountains of Montana, so everything is either uphill or downhill. I shine my light to where I hear the thing, but it is behind trees and I can't see much of anything. It keeps going until I go to lock my chicken coop up for the night. I bring both dogs with me, and as soon as I start to walk the 80 feet to the pen, one of my dogs runs to the backside of the mudroom, through the dog door. I bring the last one with me to the chicken coop, and as soon as I shut the door I turn back and the dog sprints back to go inside. It ditches me. I lock the chicken coop door as fast as possible and I run faster than I ever have, keeping the light on the hill where I heard the creature last. I get inside, lock every door, and I stay in the living room all night, checking outside every now and then. To this day I have no clue what that thing was, and I've never had another encounter with it. I have also stopped going outside at night, especially when it is quiet.
Life as a Dissident by Dissident Girl. The dictionary defines a dissident as a person who opposes the official policy, especially that of an authoritarian state. This is a nonconformist point of view typically brought out by disgust in government or how laws are dished out. Thus, this hits problematic, high-risk teen males more than any other peer group. In this way, I'm what you would consider an outstanding minority, as I was and am a female in the range of teens. This story takes place between the ages of 14 and 19, from 5 years past to present. I will tell you one story per entry as they are all long. All the details in this story are true, even the parts that may seem made up. There will be plenty, as this story is about a paranormal and uncanny experience of a rebellious teenage girl who ran away from her home in Mendocino County one evening in 2017. I will remember this day for the rest of my life. It is the day my life changed forever and carved the path that led to this present day. I had been raised by my aunt and uncle, who had always taken any amount to remind me what a burden I was to them and how unfair it was that God had to leave me with them after an accident killed both my mother and father. My Aunt Judy was always the worst of the pair, being my mother's older sister who had always been extremely jealous of my mother for her being prettier and in general more popular than her. My Uncle Hugh was more like the sniveling dog who always had something to say after my aunt and had sufficiently dug into me. At 14, I had become enough fed up with my life that I plotted my escape. Packing as efficiently as I could, I left a note in my bed, or the mattress that was on the floor, that read, "Dear Auntie and Uncle, I no longer wish to remain in your home. You have made no effort to harbor a tolerable relationship with me, so I have no wish to stay where I am unwanted. Please do not follow me or try to find me. You will not know where I am going or whom I am leaving with, as you never have taken part in my life or had any interest. Good riddance. Signed, Clara." They never sent anyone to look for me since I was homeschooled. No one noticed me going missing. I hitched a ride with the passing driver. She was kind and didn't ask questions. I was so weathered I must have looked older than I was. My life of being someone's burden was finally over. Not even a week after I ejected myself from my family's life, I was on the street, living in the Pine Barrens in New Jersey. Once the sun fell, not daring to be seen slipping into my little abode during the day, I had fashioned myself a little shelter out of fallen branches, plenty within the thick forest that overtook the landscape almost as soon as you stepped into the trail. My little hut was warm, if not slightly snug. Branches used to cut the world's view from me and hopefully protect me from any wandering weirdos. As a weapon, I had a pine branch that was fashioned into a very sharp point in case I ever needed to defend myself. I was and am self-sufficient, since I had been preparing for my escape from hell for a year.
I had help from YouTube on how to make tools and such. The evening was warm and still. The usual chatter of crickets and frogs filling the night air wasn't even apparent. I was in a fretful sleep, rolling over in my little wooden confines, again and again, finally falling asleep at around 11. Despite being asleep, I woke up to dead silence and the average ambience was gone. A terrible, putrid smell hung about the air. Even at this age, I knew silence in the forest was a terrible sign, typically signaling that a predator was in the area. A shuffling of heavy hooves nearby that I could not quite make out as a deer. A deer has 4 hooves, and these hefty footfalls sounded like they were bipedal. It almost sounded like whatever was making that noise was injured. The smell was so repulsive that it made me gag. My hand was coming up to cover my mouth to muffle the sounds of my retching. There came a voice from the direction opposite of the heavy hoofbeats that had been heard previously.
"So hungry. I'm sorry. Need to feed."
The voice was like a raspy whisper, but also demonic. Between every word, the beast took a deep inhale as if to target our prey. I became instantly petrified with fear as I heard this bone-chilling creature speak in its nails on the chalkboard voice. The light yet spectral tone seeming to speak directly into my mind rather than from the mysterious creature's body. In the distance, a deep, boisterous howl and the other beasts seemingly fled, leaving me to sit there in terror for a few hours until daybreak. I never returned to that forest area again. The next day, I managed to drum up enough cash for a bus trip to South Oklahoma. Another story for another day. Thank you for sharing my story. It Spoke to Me by Alex Pierce. Hi Swamp Dweller, my name is Alex, and I come from Cherokee ancestry. Ever since I was about 9 years old, my great-grandfather had told me many stories about the legendary Sasquatch on many occasions in Germansville, Pennsylvania. He would have me and my 2 brothers sit on a wooden bench he made from eastern hemlock trees in front of a bonfire. He was full Cherokee, and he would talk about how his grandfather shared these stories with him the same way with us. One of the stories he told us was that his grandfather had some connection with these creatures. All I could do was give him all my attention as I never looked away, staring into his big brown eyes. He talked about their nighttime rituals and how they'd get responses from the creatures. He said they would talk to them from a distance and understood every word. While my great-grandfather mentioned a few chanting words, I heard something coming from my right, loud steps crushing the ground leaves. My great-grandfather said, "Don't mind that sound, son. This is what they do, so ignore it until it starts talking." I apologized quickly for turning my head towards the loud steps. He continued their story about their origins, and mentioned that they had been here long since the beginning of time, and they had traveled long ways from Alaska to Canada. Again, and he taught us some of the words from his native language. I noticed that the stepping sounds had stopped and it was not far from us. It sounded like it only stopped 20 feet into the woods, so I tried my hardest to ignore it as my great-grandfather continued his story. Suddenly, the creature starts to speak. I don't know what it was saying, but it sounded like unknown gibberish. I couldn't help but ask Grandpa if he knew what it was saying, and he said he didn't know. But that's what they do from time to time to communicate with each other. Before I knew it, I heard another one coming from the woods to my left, and it started speaking that same gibberish. I was frozen and scared at this point. I couldn't see anything, but knew how close they were to us. My brothers looked at me in fright and begged my grandpa to return to the house. Grandpa told us everything was fine and they would walk away. I couldn't see eye shine or anything like that. I couldn't even get a glimpse of them. But they finally did start walking deeper into the woods after some time. I hope I never have that same experience again in my lifetime. Thanks, Swamp Dweller, for sharing my story, and I hope anybody that hears this doesn't have to get this close to a Sasquatch. NASA is Hiding Something Terrible by R.J. NASA is hiding something terrible. This story occurred a few years ago in 2019. I, at the time, was a senior in high school. I live in South Mississippi near the NASA-owned Stennis Space Center. Here, they do test rocket engines for future space travel. Since the rocket engines are known to create a large blast, there are thousands of acres of dense pine forest around the testing area to hold large game such as deer and wild hog. On a seemingly warm and humid night in mid-September, I decided to trespass in the buffer zone to try my luck at bagging a wild hog. I was using an AR-15 with a night scope. Around 11 p.m. I exited from I-10 onto some back roads that took me to more minor logging roads, leading into the buffer zone. I parked my truck outside the buffer zone just a bit and started my 2-mile walk into the pines. I found a tree I liked just off the dirt road and set up my overlook over the street, and a large field left over from the logging field. Not even 10 minutes into the setup of my tree stand, I see a set of headlights flashing amberly. Shit, I must have set off some motion detection or have been spotted on a trail camera. I held tight in the tree, and the car stopped a few hundred feet away from the road. I can make out the word security on the side of the vehicle through my scope. 2 men get out and one sparks up a cigarette.
Probably just some kids,
I hear one of them say.
"Wanna look around?"
The others say. I couldn't help but notice the nighttime noises you usually hear slowly fade away, and both men grew uneasy by the looks of it, and without a word they got back in their car and drove away in a hurry. That was odd, I told myself as I realized that no noises were coming from the surrounding forest, not even the cool breeze that usually flows through the pines. Like clockwork, I hear a deafening howl or a scream. It was a blood-curdling screech that sounded like a crow if it would howl like a wolf. I grew up on the bayou and had Native American blood, so honestly, I've heard many stories of the Rougarou and other folk stories. I've spent plenty of time in the woods and have never heard any noise like it. I'm a big guy now. I'm 6'4", 220 pounds, give or take, not to mention I have an AR-15. But just then I crapped myself. I quickly dropped down the tree, scraping myself badly, and began walking fast to get out of there. Before I exited the clearing, I scanned the field with my night vision scope, and there I saw it, maybe 100 yards away, staring me down, a sizable coyote-looking animal. We don't have wolves, so that was out of the picture. But this thing was huge, and it looked almost human in some places. Its hands were spotty with mangy fur. It was patchy with white or gray skin under it. I hauled ass, and I was not going to stay and try to be the badass guy from the movies who hunts and kills the mysterious creature. I ran for maybe 15 minutes until I could see my truck ahead. It was a white truck, so it reflected well in the moonlight. I couldn't help but notice what sounded like another pair of footsteps running with me. I wasn't stopping to try to see what it was, and my goal was to get to my truck and never look back. As I got to my vehicle, I fumbled with my keys because it was an older truck and didn't have a remote unlocked. When I got in, I started it and flipped on my light bar. I could see a set of glowing orange eyes staring at me, right in the front of my windshield. I stepped on it and drove 15 minutes to my house, where I got home and could not sleep. In the days following, I asked my buddy's dad, who I'm close with, who works as an essential guy over at the Stennis in the security department. He just shrugged it off and almost laughed about it. I have a feeling he knows what it was, and since then I haven't heard any other stories about it. But I have heard other stories about Stennis Space Center, like creepy men dressed in all black suits darting into the forest. Almost like that video that surfaced a few years ago of all those faceless guys in suits on the side of the road. I've heard some similar stories to mine, but nothing exact. Please let me know what you think of these odd encounters. The Strigoi by Purple Hyena. My mom has worked at a small, rural hospital for about 6 years. She is the ER receptionist. She is the first person you see when you come into the emergency room, the one that will give you all the paperwork to fill out and such. Throughout the years that she has worked there, she primarily has worked nights, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., and has seen quite the cast of characters the town has to offer, Every transient, druggie, and local has passed through that lobby at some point, and she has seen each of them at least twice. But one night she encountered something she had never seen before. My mom was quick to get the hang of things in the first year, so she was left alone to work the counter. The ER faced the parking lot, so she could see people coming in far, far away, and anticipated their moves. One night at about 2 a.m., she was working on her computer, looked up, and was surprised to see two people standing there. A man and a woman were just standing there, staring at her, and she stared back. The parking lot was dark, no car in sight, and they just appeared. After a long moment, they entered the lobby and went up to the desk. My mom said the alarm bell started going off in her head and something was just not right. For one thing, they were very tall. The desk my mom sat at was easily mid-chest to an average person. With these people, my mom could see the woman's pelvic bone. They were dressed for hot summer weather because it was the summer. They were also very skinny, and my mom emphasized this. They were very dry looking, but they didn't look like your typical druggies. The woman stroked her neck with long fingers, saying she had a sore throat. My mom didn't say a word for the first and only time. She just looked at them. A phrase kept repeating in her head, Strigoi. As my mom looked at them, the woman looked at the man, then looked back at my mom, then to the man again, the whole time just smiling and stroking her throat, and said to the man, "Do you think she will let us through, or should we go somewhere else?" My mom stayed silent as the woman repeated the pattern of looks. They both smiled at my mom and left. Almost immediately after, my mom texted me asking if vampires needed permission to enter places like hospitals. I told her that since she was technically the person to say who went back to the ER, they would need her permission. We both knew that Strigoi was a type of Romanian vampire myth that normally we thought wouldn't be really, true. But she kept hearing that phrase in her mind. She has never seen that couple again, and we still talk about what happened every so often. It does make me wonder when I hear about stories of black-eyed children and other tales of vampires. What did she see that night? And how close was she to something unreal? First off, I'd like to say that I grew up in rural Tennessee. Hunting and three-wheelers were commonplace, and I stayed in the woods either hunting or playing a real-life army role-playing game. No, it's not just role-playing. I've had 7 deployments and I've had my fair share of trauma. I retired in 2012 and had a tan beret. Some will know what I'm referring to. Anyway, this story was kind of 2 parts. First, my father-in-law got me interested in metal detecting. I know, boring to some. However, having property where a Civil War battlefield and the Trail of Tears went by is extremely neat, and the history right on my property has many secrets there. However, with history comes repercussions at times. March 2020 came and money was tight, so we moved here. The house had to be remodeled, and that's a job that is still going on till this day. I went out on part of our 11-acre spot of land that my wife grew up on. She said she heard some weird things around the area and might have even seen something. Being from the country and seeing the things I have, I just dismissed it. I was out doing a little detecting around the property after a strong storm. A few trees were blown over, and they say rain will push what's in the ground up. I hit on a spot, and I began to dig but was confused after maybe 2 feet and I hadn't found anything. I continued to dig when I saw a huge, what I assumed to be, rock. However, it was a tomahawk. Cool, I thought. I had found a few more items that had to be some sort of Native American made tool. I brought them up and immediately had this weird feeling. That night was our 2nd night there. We had no water because the lines had to be redone. We had bought a small camper for us and our 9 terriers. These are the most protective dogs I have ever owned, and I've had quite a few. That night as we went to bed, my wife and I were talking. Now she has a master's degree, so she has some common sense. So as we talk, the toilet flushed. I looked at her and we don't have running water. I hadn't hooked the line up yet or anything. Then suddenly the faucet came on. At this I'm up. Water coming out with no water. That doesn't make any sense.
let's just even say, being an Army Ranger, this unnerved me. The dogs have lost it, and all 9 slept on top of me or against me. The next day, my little guy that always rides and who I protected from the others had a heat stroke and passed. Out of the blue, I'm all emotional because he slept each night on my shoulder, his spot, and now he's gone. That evening, it's a 2-mile walk away from the driveway to a store. I had loaded 50 pounds in my backpack and walked with it. That night, I'm talking to a friend during my walk, and as I returned, I turned on my flashlight, and as I made a corner in the trail, I saw something out of the corner of my eye that will forever stay in my memory. It was a hulking creature, kind of looked like the Marlboro Man. It was like a black shadow almost. I double-timed it to the camper. I grabbed my AR-15, and I unloaded everything in my backpack. By the time I got back out there though, nothing was there. And that night I noticed in the mirror as I was shaving that there were things drawn. I asked my wife. She froze and thought I had done it, thinking I was messing with her. From that moment on, she'd hear my voice, and I'm not even home. It would sound like something on the outside of the camper was scratching at the windows and on the side panels. Sometimes you would even see a silhouette through the window blinds. We were very scared, and we didn't know what to do. And knowing that we were on Native American land, we had a Native American medicine man come and bless our camper and give us blessings as well. After that, this thing, creature, whatever, has seemingly left us alone and hasn't followed us anywhere. I don't know if this really counts much as a cryptid encounter, but it was an encounter with something that I can't quite explain, that I will never forget. Hello, Swamp Dweller. I am an avid outdoorsman in Southwest Ohio. I hunt every species in the state and fish for the most available fish species. I went to college in Southeast Ohio near Wayne National Forest. I believe the story I'm about to tell you is from the summer of 2016, sometime in June. My friend and I had just finished our junior year of high school, and we were fishing like crazy all summer. Almost every day, all day it seemed. One Saturday afternoon, we decided to try out a state park near our town. Sycamore State Park is about 2,300 acres near Trotwood, Ohio. We left around 6 p.m. and got there around 6:30. As we arrived, we noticed the parking lot was full, with over 30 cars probably already. We looked over at the reservable shelter and saw that there was a wedding reception going on at the time. We congratulated them as the top of the trail went right by the pond and down to the hill. We got down there, started fishing for catfish, and almost immediately got a hit. We lost track of time and noticed it was getting close to 10:30 at night, and the park closes at 11. So we packed our gear and the fish we had caught and made our way to the wooded stairs back toward the parking lot. We didn't have a flashlight at the time and my phone was broken, so our only light was the light coming from my friend's Samsung. Once we got to the top of the hill, we turned to the bend in the trail right before the shelter, and we noticed the shelter security light was already on. We stopped and looked under the awning to see a large creature bent over the trash can. My friend gasped out loud, enough to make this thing straighten up, turn its hips, and slip away into the darkness out of sight. We fast walked back to the car and sped out of there going 70 miles per hour the whole way home. My friend never believed in Sasquatch or anything of the sort, but after that night, I think everybody became a believer. This thing was easily 6 foot, 6.5 foot tall. It had dark gray fur, and I guess it was a Bigfoot. Last night, I had a lot of strange and stressful dreams, particularly about a woman who was stalking me. I had woken up sometime around 5 in the morning to leave for work, but ended up waking up at 5:30 from my stressful dream. When I rolled over to check my phone for the time, I noticed right away that I saw something staring at me through my window. It was standing slightly away from the door, looking directly at me. My back door to my house has a long, narrow window that you can see out of. At first, I thought my vision was blurry due to me just waking up,
and being slightly stressed, but I just sat there for a couple of minutes, staring straight at this thing. I thought maybe my eyes still weren't fully adjusted, but I could see whatever this thing was moving. This thing had white and brown fur, and it looked like it might even be going mangy at the top. I was startled and considered that maybe I was dreaming or having sleep paralysis, but I firmly believed that this just was not the case. I could still think for myself and was questioning absolutely everything. I could still move and talk. I was just frozen with fear. I slowly pulled the blanket over my head and made a small space in between so I could still see the thing. I'm a bit blind, so naturally my vision blurred once I did that. I watched, frozen in fear, for roughly 15 minutes until my alarm went off, and then I decided to investigate. I felt safer because my family and friends would start waking up around the same time as I usually did. There was nobody there and no trace of any human being or any creature around. We have a backyard camera pointing towards the back door where I thought I saw the guy. I asked my mom if she would come check them around the same time I saw the guy, and she told me that the only thing on our deck was a fox. The window is very much above ground, so there's no way a fox would be able to get up that high for me to see. I do practice my culture. I don't know if maybe that had anything to do with it, but the whole experience confused me. I was very alert the moment I saw the thing on my deck. I could see this thing's face and head move a bit as it stared me down through the window. It felt intimidating, and it almost snapped me out of my sleepiness that I was in. Does anyone know what this could have been? A lot of friends and other natives around the area say it could have been a skinwalker, but I don't want to jump to conclusions. I am 21 years old, turning 22 in July, and living in St. Louis, Missouri. I've watched stories of werewolves, wendigos, and skinwalkers, but for me, this is one encounter that will stick with me for the rest of my days. It was back around New Year of 2021. I was 20 years old at the time, and everyone but myself went to bed because they usually don't stay up for the countdown for New Year's. So I stayed up watching the TV. I got hungry at one point, so I made some popcorn and added some white cheddar popcorn powder afterward. I grabbed some Sprite from the refrigerator and waited for the popcorn, but out of the corner of my eye, I saw something flash by. I didn't think much of it at first, only thinking it was my imagination, not knowing that later I would regret not taking it seriously. I sat on the couch with my finished popcorn and soda, watching the TV before the power went out. It was not odd around my subdivision. This happens every now and then. I had to wait roughly 10 minutes before the power would come back on, and that's when I saw something outside on the back deck. Our deck is all wooden, so whatever was out there, I could hear the claws tapping across the boards. I froze, and knowing the window to the deck was next to me, I didn't want to take any chances of being seen by whatever it was. I felt like someone or something was watching me from the window. So I slowly but very carefully turned my head to see a big bear-sized dog or wolf-like thing staring right at me. I didn't lock eyes with it in fear that it would see me as some sort of prey. This was no dog. I'm no expert on werewolves, but I'm pretty sure what I saw was a werewolf. I slowly reached over to grab my phone when the werewolf had its face on the window from the deck looking at me with red eyes. The ones you would see in an anime with wolves when it's angry or wanting to attack. I stopped frozen in my tracks once again, sweat dripping, and I could feel my heart begin to race. Was I going to be this thing's next meal? I saw this thing's large canine teeth as they looked at me with eyes that wanted to tear me into shreds. This thing began to pant and it almost sounded like it was trying to speak to me. I didn't want to know what this thing had to say even if it could speak. I thought to myself maybe I could try to blind it and get away, so I took my phone and shined my flashlight directly in its eyes. It looks like this worked because that werewolf thing growled in annoyance and ran off the deck. After a few minutes I heard another howl from the distance. I never saw that werewolf, dog man, whatever creature again, and I've never told anyone about it until this show. Hi, Swamp Dweller. I'm from Arizona, and I listen to your podcast after work while finishing homework, and I enjoy these stories. Since I'd hate to see this podcast go, I'd like to share one of my family's cryptid stories with you. Because of this encounter in particular, I usually don't turn down others' experiences immediately and deem them crazy. This encounter happened in the mid-90s in the Sonoran Desert. My grandma, her husband, her daughter, her sister-in-law, and her brother and sister were returning from Yuma, heading to Phoenix. I don't exactly remember why they were traveling. I'm tempted to say they were visiting family, but I could be wrong. One of the reasons I'm mentioning all these people to give this story the credibility it deserves is because they all experienced it. 5 people witnessed this. My grandpa was the only person in the car who didn't seem to see the creature. But that was because he was sitting in the shotgun seat and didn't get the right view or angle. It was close to midnight and my great-uncle Stephen was driving. Not rushing home, just enjoying the silent drive through the desert like everybody else in the vehicle. This is where things began to get weird though. My deaf great-aunt was looking out the car window into the darkness and then suddenly grabbed my grandma's arm. My grandma was confused when she saw her face. It looked like she had seen a ghost or something. My grandma looked too and saw a figure running alongside the vehicle. She says it must have been around 7 feet tall. But that wasn't the scariest feature at all. It was the creature's face. I mean, its eyes were stretched out very large, like Muto's eyes on the 2014 film Godzilla. But even scarier than that was the creature's weird and crooked smile. You could see its sharp teeth as it glared evilly into the window. My great-uncle pressed the gas pedal, sending the car roaring to 100 miles per hour down the street. The creature still ran alongside the vehicle, but failed to keep up. After my uncle pushed over 100. My grandpa, who hadn't seen the animal, said, "What the hell are you doing?" My great-uncle turned to him. "You didn't see that thing?" Though this encounter rocked my family, they don't like to talk about it too much. They didn't start talking about the creature until quite a few years after, when one of them decided to bring it up. My great-uncle and one of the other family members drew up some sketches of the creature and compared them, revealing the graphics to be nearly identical. Which was weird because they sent the pictures to each other and hadn't seen the other person's picture before. My grandma drew up a sketch for me to see. It looked genuinely evil as the others had described it. Even though they don't like these types of movies, my family watched the movie The Predator because that creature in the film closely resembled the beast they had seen that chilling night. My grandmother remembers watching it and says that that is exactly what she saw. I remember the sketch looking very similar as well. So, my question to the swamp is, what exactly was this creature? I have no idea. My family deemed it a chupacabra since it somewhat corresponds with the chupacabra's profile. But I saw some problems with it. Chupacabras have never been reported this large before in any part of the world that I could find, usually topping off at 4 or 5 feet and are known to have spikes on their backs, unlike the creature my family encountered, which had somewhat of dreadlocks dangling down the back of its grotesque head. I'd think it's some evil spirit or something concerning Native American witchcraft, like maybe a skinwalker, but I don't think I will ever know. Yet this story sticks with me even till this day, reminding me that my distant Native American heritage is very real. I have a couple of stories to share here, all of them involving my family's cabin in a small town in Wyoming. So, for starters, I need to put this into context. I was born and raised in South Dakota, and if you ever look at a map of it, you will see that it's a great beige rectangle with a singular circle of green right on the west side of the state. That is where I grew up. Now, the west side of South Dakota has some amazing sights, and it makes up for there being pretty much nothing to do here. But nothing here holds a candle to the cabin. The cabin is exactly what it sounds like. A log cabin with no running water, a well, and a creek adjacent. The only modern part about it is that it has electricity, and that was added in the 1930s. It is an hour away from my hometown, and if you die up there, there is no chance you will ever be found. So, it is my favorite place to go. It was great, and when I was stressed from high school and such, and I wanted to get away, it was exactly where I would go. And now that I am 25, it is still my favorite place to unwind after a long week, but it has its quirks. I'm going to start with the most normal of stories. Not normal because this stuff happens all the time, but because there was no paranormal, extraterrestrial, or ooga booga stuff that I could really lay on for an explanation. I was 13 years old at my sister's birthday party. My sister and I always celebrate our birthdays up there. My dad had to leave to take my sister's friend who could not sleep over back to their home. My mom does not like to spend the night up there, so she left before sun went down. This left 13-year-old me with about 5, 10 to 11-year-old girls. In short, I was miserable. I was poking at the fire, planning on dropping some scary stories on them so that they would have nightmares when I heard a distinct rustling noise coming from the dry creek just ahead of us. I looked up from the fire and saw a figure approaching us. I told my sister to quietly get back to the cabin. She looked at me and was about to say, "Why?" when she saw that my eyes were fixed on some sort of singular point. She followed my gaze, and not long after, she saw the old bearded man, wide-eyed and stumbling toward us. She screamed, prompting her friends to scream, and they all ran back to the cabin. The screaming stunned me, as I was sure that this man would now proceed to kill me after he was done marching to the cabin, and then would finish off the girls. But that did not happen. Instead, he stopped and just started mumbling some incoherent nonsense. I could only make out a few words, something about deer, rope, and crick, and some sort of razor blade. Eventually, I gathered up the courage to tell him off. I let him know there were guns in the cabin, and if he did not leave, I would go get one. After I said this, I began to walk towards the cabin and eventually retreated inside of it. We told my dad when he got back what happened, and he wasted no time gathering up people from the surrounding community. The old guy was caught, but not by the police. He was caught by his daughter, who thanked my dad. I was not there for that part. This guy was just an incredibly old man with dementia who wandered out of his cabin and followed the road to ours, thinking it was one of the cutoffs to the creek. As for the razor blades, well, back in the 1970s, a group of rednecks got tired of city people swimming in their creek. So, one of the rope swings they attached had razor blades on it. A bunch of kids got their hands cut up, and the rednecks were never caught, and all they managed to do was get basically every rope swing cut down and banned from the area. I feel sadder than scared when I remember this. However, this is only the first story I have up there. Now, before I go any further, I need you to realize that this place was located on a mountain. It was very remote, as I explained earlier, but definitely had something living on the land. When I was a teenager, I used to hang out there with my friends all the time. We'll call them P and S, just for anonymity's sake. So, one day, we were just sitting outside and talking about all the weird stuff that has happened out here, and this road that we were on. We were just taking a walk and trying to enjoy ourselves. It just goes straight up into the woods from here. And as we were sitting there just talking, all of us got the worst feeling of dread. This was not normal. It felt like I was being watched from all sides. Just to let you know, we were still close enough to where I lived to be able to see the motion lights and everything else. That's when we noticed out of nowhere, the motion lights had turned on. At first, we thought it might just be one of the animals that live around here. Obviously, there are dogs that roam and such like that, or maybe it was just one of my family members going outside for a second. So, we decided to make our way back to the house. As we're making our way there though, my friend stops me and tells me that they see something around on the corner of the house. At first I think they're just seeing stuff because it is kind of dark out. But then, we hear a blood-curdling screech and some sort of garbled noise. It almost sounds like something is trying to yell something, but it also just sounds so inhuman. And then, that's when we noticed a deer. It was standing there, looking at us, with these whited out eyes. They looked clouded, is the best way I can describe it. This thing was absolutely massive though. It looked distorted. It looked wrong. It was just like all of the stories I have heard on this channel in the past. It was at that very moment I knew I was either looking at a skinwalker or a knot deer. Now the first thing I did was hold my breath and get ready to tell my friends to run as fast as they could to the front door. We were on a mountain far away from the next town, and there was nothing that could come save us if this thing got angry and decided we were its next meal. So we began sprinting towards the door, and it looks like this thing is beelining to cut us off. But strangely, as we are about to intersect and almost run into this thing, it suddenly turns and runs the opposite way, but on two legs, and is suddenly yelling something that I can't quite make out and decipher, but it sounds like a distorted radio, like when you hear a radio just malfunctioning incredibly going through station from station. That's what this thing sounded like. We could hear it bounding through the forest, going up higher into the mountain. I don't know what we experienced that night, but I'm just glad that we got away with our lives. I know for sure though, that what we encountered must have been a skinwalker, and I have since dubbed that area Skinwalker Mountain.
Something Worse Than a Bear by Braxton. Hi Swamp Dweller, my name is Braxton Pierce. I've sent you a few stories about some of my experiences at home here in Georgia. But what I'm about to tell you happened last summer when my wife and I went to Washington State for a week-long camping trip. We brought our camper with us to a reserved spot in Eatonville. It was amicable and warm during the whole week. Anyway, the first 2 nights were great as we cooked up some chicken and beans on our grill and roasted some marshmallows to make some s'mores for a little nighttime snack. The third night is when we had this crazy experience. A loud sound had woken me up a little after midnight, and then it woke my wife as our kids and babies soon were sound asleep. They can sleep through anything. Whatever we heard wasn't that far from our campsite, as it could have easily been about 10 to 15 yards away. It let out this strange whooping sound, and we could smell it. It smelled like hot garbage and roadkill combined. It was unbearable. Do you know how most campers have those dim yellow lights on outside? Well, we could see the lights from the inside window, and the smell got worse as this thing walked right in front of the yellow light of our camper. Now, my first thought was a bear, but bears don't typically stand on 2 feet for no good reason. All the food we ate we made sure to cover up and had all the leftovers because there were grizzly bears around. We even cleaned the grill so they won't smell the food from it. This creature had to be standing at around 7 or maybe even 8 feet tall, and we heard it make this low growling sound. Now, I've been around quite a few bears in my life, and I've never heard them make a noise like this. So at this point, we're about 100% certain this was no bear. My wife and I were frozen solid, and I could see tears running down her cheeks. I whispered as silently as I could, "Shh, try to be quiet." Out of nowhere, this thing suddenly makes a loud whooping sound again. This time it does it in groups of 2, and it sounds much louder because it's right in front of the RV. Our camper even shook a little bit as it was walking around us. It had eventually left about 30 or so minutes later, and we could eventually go to sleep. The next day we woke up at about 7 a.m. We stepped out of the camper and saw other people outside gathered around, looking at these absolutely massive footprints that the creature left behind in front of us. I asked them, "Excuse me, we heard this thing last night. Did you guys hear it?" Most everybody said they did. "Look what it did right in front of your guys' camper." I looked at the set of footprints in total shock while everybody else was getting pictures of it. Everybody packed up and went home, even us. We even got our money back for the spot. I decided to inform the BFRO team to investigate the prints, and they got negative results, saying there weren't any known prints of the local wildlife, so it was likely 100% a Bigfoot. We personally decided to never go back there again, but the BFRO teams have been doing more investigations in that area, so hopefully we'll get more good hard evidence of these things. Thanks for sharing my story.
Bigfoot in Alabama by Bradley G. Hello, Swamp Dweller. I'm a big fan and have been listening for quite some time. Anyway, this is my encounter with what I believe to be a Bigfoot. A bit of background. I am a pretty avid outdoorsman. I grew up in the woods and always knew about Bigfoot, but never thought I'd see one. So to set the scene, it was 2016, maybe 2017, around New Year's time. Also, my birthday, and my family decided to take my best friend Lorenzo and myself to Alabama. I live in Texas, to visit some distant relatives for my birthday. We hung out with the family for a while and eventually gave up, and went to hang out in the woods like we always did. Anyway, Lorenzo, my cousin Tyler, and I explored the woods. While doing so, we came across an old abandoned mobile home. So we looked around and entered. Breaking typical teen stuff, we finished exploring the house and walked into the master bedroom, where we found a massive nest made from pine branches. We were in the mobile home for about 25 or 30 minutes when suddenly we heard this ungodly roar come from right outside. Then, the home started to rock back and forth violently, to the point it felt like it was going to tip over with us in it. So we crawled out of a hole in the ceiling and started running. As we returned to the house, I turned my head, and I swear, on everything I know that's true, I think I saw a Bigfoot. As I looked at this massive creature, it locked its eyes with me and it started chasing us back to the house. We even cut through 3 yards between my cousin's house and the woods, and it stopped at the edge of the woods and watched us walk into the house. I wish I could say that was the end, but unfortunately, it's not. In the middle of the night, I awoke to my cousin and Lorenzo telling me to shh, it's right outside the window. So I go to peek through the blinds, and when I part them there, I was staring face to face with this thing, and it looked angry to say the least. So we grabbed the guns and went outside where we saw it, and there was nothing. So I take out an alternative cigarette and stare into the woods. We go to the abandoned mobile home about halfway in there, and I feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I slowly turned around, and there it is, only a couple of feet away. This thing again looks absolutely angry. So, being a bit inebriated now after my alternative cigarette, I do the only thing that I can assume to do. I run. I book it all the way back to the house with my friends as we're hooting and hollering the whole time, absolutely scared out of our mind. And yes, we're loaded to the teeth with guns, but running was honestly probably the best option. Eventually, once we all made it to the house and calmed down and got our wits about ourselves, we decided that we would never talk about this again. We don't want to sound crazy. We don't want people to think that we're some crazy yahoos out there. But I know what I saw, and I know what we experienced. The Tickle Monster by Hauntingly Familiar 2. It all started when I was just a wee lass. Now, I've been dealing with ghost-related stuff for most of my life, but this is the strangest occurrence. Every night from the age of 4 to 7, maybe even 8, I would have chronic sleep paralysis. Anyone who has ever experienced sleep paralysis knows how frightening this can be. My experiences were just a little different. I would be visited by a creature that I named the Tickle Monster. It was always the same thing. The first thing that would happen would be a sign popping up where the bed meets the wall. It was generally written in blood. The sign would say,
"He's coming. He's here," or something ominous. Then, the window or door would be open, and he would appear. I am trying to remember his exact appearance. However, I remember that he had long dreadlocks, a pale complexion, and long, bony fingers that were more like claws. He would approach my bed and proceed to quote-unquote tickle me. Being a child, I didn't know how to describe what he was doing, but that was the closest description I could come up with. This was not a joyful or fun experience, though. I wouldn't be able to move or scream, and once he finished tickling me, he would just leave. I would fully wake up and call my father or my mother, and this happened almost every single night, and the sequence of events would mostly stay the same. My mother would try to get me to communicate with the tickle monster as if he were real. This thing, it had an ungodly mouth. Its mouth was full of razor-sharp, shark-looking teeth. She never doubted what I was experiencing was legitimate, but nothing really ever came of it. I don't know if she thought it was just something in my brain and it would go away after a while, or if it was a legitimate experience. One night, it just stopped and never happened again. I've only had 2 instances of sleep paralysis since that time, and neither of them had anything to do with the tickle monster. I've looked this up online to see if anybody else had this experience, but I'm not having any help finding it. My manager told me of a voodoo demon who would steal children in the middle of the night or something like that, but I'm not sure it's an exact match. Part of me thinks that this was a product of an overactive imagination, but there's still a part of me that believes it could have been something more. Maybe some sort of cryptid, paranormal entity, or some other otherworldly creature. The Blob Monster by Anonymous. So it was around February of 2017. I was 15 years old and had a dry throat at the time. For that year, I wanted to build a shed in the middle of the woods of my backyard, just to go hang out in as a fun project to do for the summer months. So on a cold, dry, windy, but sunny day, probably around noonish or late morning, I started the hike alone in the woods of my backyard to find the perfect spot to put down this shed. The shape and the geography of the property section with the woods are weird. The woods part of the property pokes out like the Oklahoma Panhandle, and to get to the deepest woods of my property where I wanted to build the shed, you must walk up a hill, and then that hill eventually plateaus. Also, that hill is easily the tallest in the general area. And on the day my encounter happened, I was to see hundreds if not thousands of feet, especially since there were no leaves on the trees. It's a 2-minute hike. You can see things like rusty barrels and metal fences in the woods, mainly because my backyard woods were a popular hunting spot back in the day. This is evident with the rusty metal barrels and beer cans I can find dating back to the 1980s. I hiked through the property and reached the plateau hill part. Also note that someone's house was probably 100 feet from where I was. I had a pretty good view of the entire property, and there was also a barn in someone's house quite far from us where I could see way out in the distance. So for a few minutes I started looking for a good spot to put this shed. I eventually picked one and imagined how to build the shed. I wanted to start from scratch. While doing this, I heard a 5-note whistle, song type thing in the distance. Now, I'm no musician, but I will try to describe it. It was like 2 long flat notes with a short break between 2 and then the next note. A higher pitch swinging note followed. Then quickly, an average swinging note. Then back to a long flat note with a higher pitch than the first 2. And whoever was whistling kept repeating it and had lungs of steel. Now, I honestly looked around for quite a few minutes to see if I could find whoever was whistling. It sounded like it was coming from deeper into the woods, way downhill, but I didn't see anyone. I also checked the house and the barn to see if I could see anyone, and sure enough, there was not a living, breathing soul. I also thought that I didn't hear the rustling of leaves either. The whole woods were covered in them, and the rustling of leaves was loud and could easily give away your location. But there wasn't any rustling. I immediately ignored it, as probably one of my neighbors or something. Also, please note that the whistling was not an animal, but a human. It had to be. Birds have chirp-like whistles, but this was a lot more breathy like a human. So I returned to my spot, content that it was a person probably just walking through the woods. That was the most logical conclusion. But the whistling kept getting closer and louder, still playing the same 5 notes. And still, I could not see a single person, heard no rustling of leaves or anything like that. I was very stubborn that it wasn't something paranormal and had to be a human. Even though whatever was whistling was coming towards me and I still had no clue who or what was whistling. The whistling was going on for over a couple of minutes now, and eventually it sounded so close to me that it felt like somebody was literally on top of me. It sounded like the whistling was also coming from all directions at this point, so now I started to get a little bit spooked. I concluded that whatever this whistling was coming from had to be a threat, so I started returning to my house. It was only like a 2 or 3 minute hike. It's not like I was terribly far out like I said. I didn't run out of there or anything like that. I walked back home as possibly calm as I could. I was spooked but not terrified or anything. I also felt like if I ran, then whatever was whistling at me would pop out and chase me. So I walked and stayed calm to keep whatever it was at a stalking, taunting phase. It sure did feel like whatever was whistling at me was stalking and taunting me. Now, I must be honest, this next part of my experience felt quite trance-like, so I could have just hallucinated this part and the whistling. I've had things like sleep paralysis episodes several times in my life, and when I'm exhausted, I do sometimes hallucinate stuff. But I wasn't tired at the time, nor had I had an hallucination episode for quite a long time. All of my tired hallucinations and sleep paralysis episodes last from a fraction of a second to several seconds. So if this were a hallucination, this would be the most crazy, in-depth, longest one I've ever had. So back to my story. I'm about a minute away from making it to my house's backyard, still hearing the whistling. I decided to look up, and there it was. Something that was all gray, blurry, with no facial features. A humanoid-looking thing. It was flying above me counterclockwise. It could have been about 5 to 6 feet in height, with a wingspan around the same. The thing had the silhouette of a person, with a head, 2 arms, torso, and legs. It looks like a T with a circle on top, acting like its head. It was almost like a blob. It almost had like no body definition. I trusted my gut, and instead of running, I kept walking, despite the threats. It kept me as safe for this long, I thought I'd keep doing it. Then finally, I took one step onto the grass in my backyard and suddenly everything weird stopped. There was no more whistling. The flying thing was gone, and that feeling of foreboding and being in a trance absolutely dissipated. I remembered smelling roses, though, like it was peaceful. After that experience, I wanted to build something other than a shed in the woods. For years, even a little bit to this day, I hate being near that backyard alone. I took a long time to discuss this story because I honestly just ruled it as some sort of paranormal ghost encounter. The gray thing was possibly an angel or something like that. But after I looked on this thing called Cryptid Wiki and heard about the Kinderhook blob monster, there were kind of similarities to what I had experienced, and I did notice that there were other things called blob sightings. First, I don't live crazy far from Kinderhook. I could easily take a drive over there in like 30 minutes. 2, I saw a blob-like creature that sounds exactly like that monster. So I'm not saying that's what it was, but I have a good idea that I met the blob monster.
You have graciously shared some of my stories in the past, so I wanted to send you in another. My name is Evan, and I think I just had the weirdest encounter of my entire life. In one of my previous stories, I mentioned me and my friend were heading to Ocean City, a popular beach in Maryland, about 3 hours from where I live. Well, I decided to go down again and spend some time at our condo, just relaxing and taking a load off. Summer has been very wacky due to the pandemic, so I did not plan on spending a lot of time down on the beach. I am one of those people who enjoy the beach vibes but do not like going down on the sand or getting in the water all that much. Well, unless I am more alone and there are not loads of people clogging up the beach. Well, I drove down in my Chevy Nova on July 21st. It was just me this time, although my family was planning on joining me a couple of weeks later. So anyway, I sped all the way there, wanting to avoid stopping at all. When I pulled up, I hopped out, shutting the Nova's door and running up to the condo. I unloaded all of my bags onto one of those hotel wheel carts that they sometimes have in elevators. Our condo has one for whatever reason, and it was much more efficient than running up and down the stairs carrying my bags. Well, once I got everything in the room, I stepped onto the balcony. We were on floor 5 of the complex, and it was a beachfront. I cannot tell you how nice it was to wake up to the sound of crashing waves every morning. Anyway, the ocean looks very choppy, but there are loads of people down on the beach, not caring for 6 foot of space at all. Well, that was not going to be me, I thought, as I headed back inside. It began to rain at around 2 p.m., and the beach was basically clear. I jumped on this opportunity and ran down, and surf fished for about an hour and a half, rain pouring down on me the entire time. I caught nothing, but when I fish, I feel alive. It is one of those things like bow hunting for me that just sends me to my happy place. So the first night passes, and I order some seafood for dinner and go back to bed under freshly changed sheets. I wake up and make some coffee. I had brought down my Nintendo Switch, but I felt like I was being called to get off my butt and do something outdoors. That feeling won over, and I decided what better way to spend a nice day at the beach than to go to Assateague Island. For those who don't know, Ocean City is basically a massive sandbar, and several islands and small specks of land are surrounding it. One such place is Assateague. It is a national park, and my next door neighbor who is studying to be a park ranger really got me into going to national parks. The great thing about Assateague is that it's basically multiple environments in one. Let me briefly explain. The island has protected marshland as well as beaches. It is also a swampland and is rather big with forested sections. Basically, one massive natural playground for those who like being in the great outdoors. There are also horses that have been there for generations living on the island wild. They have a dune trail for off-road vehicles like Jeeps and certain type of pickup trucks. But since my Nova is from 1970, and sand basically equals rust on a classic car like that, it was a no-go. But I drove down and parked in one of the visitor lots. I hopped out and decided which way to go. I first hit the swamp trails and the mosquitoes destroyed me. Cursing at my stupid choice not to bring bug spray, I finished that trail. I then took the marsh path and waded in the beautiful marsh waters, seeing crabs and small fish dart by my legs. No, I know nothing scary has happened yet, and I'm sorry about that. But it will soon, I promise. Anyway, I find a good stretch of beach to lay out on. I did manage to remember to bring a towel, and so I laid out on the sand and closed my eyes. My bag and my Nova's keys were next to me, but I was not worried about this thievery. 1, the park was basically empty. At least my part was anyway. And 2, I'm 6'2", and I let my hair grow out to my shoulders. I look like a madman when I'm not properly groomed, but I would never hurt a fly. Anyway, I lost track of time. I probably got to the beach and laid down around 12. Well, my stupid self wakes up and it's already getting dark. I cursed my stupidity as I began to sit up. I screamed. I was sunburned so badly. I had put on sunblock, but I guess it had worn off. My body felt like it was flaming, and tears welled up in my eyes. I have had some horrendous injuries in my time, but sunburns are bad. If you have not ever had a bad one, imagine your skin bubbling and peeling away before your eyes as you are as red as a dang tomato. Now, here is where the scary stuff begins. As I'm trying to figure out how to hobble back to my car, I hear a loud splash. Normally, I would not think much of anything about it. There are some exceptionally large fish and even sharks off the coast of Ocean City and Assateague. I even once caught a 9-foot sand tiger shark near Assateague 2 years prior, but that is beside the point.
I realized that this splashing was maybe 7 feet out. That was very odd. The chances of a big fish being that close to shore and making that much noise were slim, to say the least. I dropped my bag and my keys as I slowly and painfully got to my feet. It took maybe 5 steps to get to the water when it made a sound I will never forget. Picture the cries of a mountain lion mixed with the low calls of a large whale. It was scary, sad, and entrancing all in one. Extremely hard to explain, honestly. My mind immediately went to tales of sirens and mermaids, whose haunting calls would lure in unsuspecting sailors to their demise. I did not believe there were mermaids. I am not a skeptic by any means, but mermaids just seem so far out. We have only explored 2% of our oceans though, so honestly who knows what's out there. These thoughts and many more swirled around my brain as I backed farther and farther away from the crashing waves. The waves were much smaller now, and whatever made that noise was splashing my way. I began to hurry back and grab my bag. I sped out of there like a bat out of hell, back towards my car in safety. I spat profanities as I realized my keys to the Nova were back on the beach. I half hobbled, half sprinted to the spot I had just left, all the while feeling my skin peel and burn. I shone my phone light on the spot in the sand where I had just been. I saw them, baseball sleds scraping my knees, and snatched the keys. As I went to get up, I met its gaze. It was the strangest thing I had ever seen. It was pale, almost translucent, like a jellyfish. Its skin looked aged but strong and muscular. Its legs were long and strangely tall like a basketball player, but there was not an inch of hair that I could see. The hands looked amphibious, and it had what almost resembled a tail. Its face was the real horror though. It looked like a clean mannequin face that you would see clothing being hung on in a department store. Except for a nose and a tiny slit which I assumed was its mouth. It was featureless. My heart was in my throat as I felt sweat pouring down my face. I, for whatever reason, smiled at it like a fool, maybe thinking this thing had some sort of emotions. It then smiled back, although it was all wrong. The tiny slit of a mouth began to expand, the face ripping and tearing apart to form an abnormally large grin. Blood trickled down this thing's face as it smiled back at me, with razor-sharp teeth glinting in my phone's flashlight. It is something that will haunt me to my dying day. I ran, screaming like a little girl. I was surprised no park ranger had heard my scream. As I ran back to my car yelling, I heard it scream back, almost mocking me in a way. I got into my car and sped out of there. When I got to the condo, I ran upstairs as fast as I could. I locked the door behind me and began breathing erratically. When I composed myself, I sat down on the couch and basically passed out. The next day I went to the local clinic and got my burns checked out. They gave me a prescription lotion to help with the burns and I went home immediately. I looked everywhere for an explanation of what I saw. It cannot be a skinwalker because I am almost certain they do not go into the water and do not live in marshes like that. Could it be aliens? Maybe some other shape-shifting cryptid? I don't know. Thanks again, Swamp Dweller, for sharing my story and encounter. I really like your channel. It has kept me going through these rough times. If anybody in the comments has any idea what this thing could be, please let me know. I have always kept an open mind about the creatures that can roam our world. Partly because I'm inquisitive by nature, and partly because of my mother. She always taught us to be aware of our surroundings and respect nature. One of the first things she taught me was to listen to the animals. They will tell you if something is out there. One time, years ago when I was a teenager, we had traveled to my dad's hometown in Texas for a family reunion. His hometown is small. You can walk through the central part of the town in less than an hour, and everyone else lived in homes further out usually. They usually had about an acre or more of land around their homes, which was very nice and private. In the evening,
we had joined my dad's large family at a hoedown near the edge of town. There were people dancing and drinking and having a good time, while me, my brother, and one of our cousins and her friend just hung out watching the festivities. We were talking about these teenager things that you'd always talk about, you know? Just who we liked or disliked at school, etc., you know? We looked out towards the edge of the party, where a fence bordered the location. We were at this separated area, where it separated the yard from the scrubland on the edge of town. We could not see far out since night had fallen, and the lights on the poles of the fence only illuminated the fence and the brush around it. As I looked out, I noticed something. An object that was half hidden by a small tree, but odd in that it was not swaying in the breeze like the rest of the foliage. I pointed it out to my brother and cousin, who spotted it as well. As we observed it, a few things became clear. It was a creature, about 5 feet tall if I had to guess. It was a tawny brown color, like a coyote. One of us asked if what it was a coyote, but we could definitely tell it wasn't. It was just too big. We cautiously, or foolishly, made our way closer to the fence till we were only 20 yards away from it. This thing was a further 10 yards from the fence on its side, just far enough to be out of the range of the light. We stopped in our tracks as we could see enough to make out that this creature wasn't something we'd ever seen in our lives. It was a creature, covered in fur, hunched over on long legs, with human-like arms. Long, gnarled hands ending in sharp claws. Its head was half hidden by the tree, but we could see a canine-like head, with a long snout and pointed ears, just like a coyote. It was staring at us, and we were staring at it. We quickly ran back to the party, realizing that we were closer to this thing than we were to our own families. If this dog man, a term we didn't know at the time, was as fast as the werewolves we had seen in movies, the fence would have been no obstacle for this thing to get us if it felt so inclined. We were all shocked into silence. Once we were back at the hoedown, we just sat there and looked at each other. Did we just see that? Do creatures like that really exist? We were simply stunned at this encounter. We didn't even know who would believe us, so we just said nothing. The next day, my family was heading back to Oklahoma. My brother and I were secretly relieved considering what we had seen. But my cousin and her friend lived in Texas, in my dad's hometown, which was part of that thing's territory. I hope she never had to see it again. I quickly moved on from that night, but that encounter has always been in the back of my mind. As time went on, and I learned about creatures that people have seen in the woods, I heard at least a name put to what we had seen, and I hoped I'd never see anything like that again. But as they say, careful what you wish for. In 2019, I was out on my boss's farm for a 3-day work excursion in the summer. His farm is about an hour away from Oklahoma City, and 80 acres of land that's mostly woods and pretty isolated. His nearest neighbor is probably over a mile away. I had been to his farm many times over the years and was very familiar with the woods around his place. There was a trail that led into the woods from the compound, and I'd walk it every morning with his dog when I came to work there. I never walked to this trail alone, and never unarmed. Not because I was worried about Dogman or Bigfoot, but because wild boar was known to live in the area, and they were the ones I was worried about. In all the years I had been up here, I had never heard about Bigfoot or Dogman being seen in the area, but plenty of boar. On this particular day, I set out towards the trail in the late afternoon, his dog Buddy right at my side. The trail was not exactly well traveled, and it was more grass than dirt. Halfway down the trail, where it was more open ground, I could already see a few deer tracks, some raccoons, even an armadillo scrape in the ground. As I was counting the different tracks, Buddy wandered off the trail into the trees to sniff at something that caught his attention or find a place to pee. I called out to him to not wander far, stepping towards the edge of the trail to do so. As I did, I looked down and saw something that made my heart stop. Right at the edge of the trail, right where the bare earth gave way to grass, was a large canine-like footprint, bigger than any footprint Buddy could ever hope to make. As he was a 75-pound German Shepherd, and I have a 150-pound Great Dane at home, and even his paws aren't this big. I put my size 10 boot next to it, and the track was over half the size of my boot. It was decently fresh, no more than 24 hours old if I had to take an educated guess. I looked back from where the track led, but could not find any more tracks of this thing. It's like this thing jumped over the trail to avoid leaving prints in the dirt. Something jumped 15 feet across the trail to avoid leaving any trace of itself. I quickly looked around and strained my ears, but I could still hear the birds singing, insects chirping, and even Buddy was calm and relaxed. I called Buddy back to my side and set off down the trail to get back towards the barn. I did not want to stay any longer in case whatever made those footprints was still in the area. Further along the trail, it became more surrounded by trees and leaves covered the trail. It's only because I had walked this trail so many times that I knew how not to get lost. But as I navigated the trail, I noticed a large branch that was right on the edge of it. Branches were nothing new on the trail, of course, and with the ice storm that had occurred over the winter, many trees had lost a lot of branches. This one itself was 12 feet long and the size of my forearm at its thinnest, and larger than my thigh at its thickest. But what made me notice this one was that it had been turned over. I could tell by the imprint in the leaves and dirt. While hogs could and would turn logs over for food, hogs did not do this. There were no hog tracks or scrapes around it, and I was mentally traced back to the trail behind me where I had seen that footprint. I realized that this branch was right in the line with the footprint. And when I noticed that, everything had fallen silent. No birds, no bugs. I looked for Buddy, but he was no longer at my side. He had continued up the trail and was now 10 yards ahead of me, looking back at me with a nervous posture and seemed to say, "We need to go now." I briefly looked around me but saw nothing in the woods, but I remember my mom telling me that old phrase, "You may not see them, but they can see you." I put a hustle in my step and caught up with Buddy, and we continued up the trail, and all but ran to the barn since I cleared the tree line. I couldn't help but think in the back of my mind once I was back inside, they're here. They're here in Oklahoma. It's foolish to assume that they just wouldn't be here, you know? For some reason I thought they may just stay in Texas because of the range or whatever. Despite me only actually seeing one in Texas and only a track of one here. This week, my brother had told me that his coworker thinks he saw a dog man on the edge of his property recently. His coworker lives in El Reno, Oklahoma. My boss's farm is only 10 miles from that town.
The Creature from the Ritual by Braxton P. Hi, Swamp Dweller. It's been about a month since I last sent in a story about some unusual experiences I've been having. Recently, I've been having crazier things happen on my property. I live in one of the most secluded areas in Georgia. It's nice and private, settling on a few thousand acres with about a 250-acre lake and no neighbors except the local wildlife. It's been family-owned since 1810. As houses have been built and rebuilt, I have had to do further research to discover why these experiences are happening to me and my family. It always appears safe during the daytime, but becomes incredibly different when night comes. During my research, I discovered this property was once a hideout for a local Cherokee tribe. Occasionally, I hear knocking on wood, knocking on the house, possible rocks being thrown below the windows, and so on. My last experience was just last night when the sun was almost out of sight. Coyotes just started becoming more active. I hear them howling and the birds are always whistling. It came to a point when all the animals suddenly went quiet, and the only thing I heard was footsteps crunching on leaves. There are no bears in this area of Georgia, but whatever it was huge, and our giant animal,
is usually a deer. This is central Georgia, not too far south of Lake Sinclair. We don't really have alligators either. I could scratch off every possible animal because those footsteps were massive. You would know it was much louder than any known animal if you heard them, like an elephant walking through. The footsteps finally stopped about 30 yards into the thick woods. The next thing I hear is what sounded like some kind of gibberish ritual, but it wasn't quite in words. I had never heard anything like this before. Even my wife heard it, and we were both on the upper back porch. We liked to sit down and enjoy the sun setting to the west side of the lake, but it was already completely dark when we heard this thing speaking in what I can only assume was tongues. I tried using a battery-powered spotlight to see where this thing was, but with no success, as it kept saying something over and over. The next thing I know, something was thrown towards us, landing on the porch. It was about 2 to 3 pounds. It was a rock, and it was pretty big. I picked it up carefully and placed it on a small sandwich bag. It might have had some sort of fingerprint evidence, I don't know. I turned it over to professionals to get a good look at it, but I don't think anything really ever came of it. I know it might sound weird to do that, but I need to find out what's going on here and what this creature is. Earlier this morning, I began searching for professionals and only found something called cryptozoologist. Since no other known studies are based on this experience, I never told my daughters or my family about this because they wouldn't understand. My daughters are only 5 years old, and I don't want them to be traumatized by this. When cryptozoology appeared on my computer, it talked about the legendary Bigfoot, their biggest passion, and a few others known as cryptids. I'm hoping to go into the woods with my wife tomorrow to see if I can find any fingerprints, and I would love to share some pics with you if we can get anything on camera. The Weirdest Halloween Ever by Pample Moose. Here in England, we don't do Halloween like you do in the United States. At least we don't in Bolton, a sub-district of Manchester. A few children dressed in bin bag capes with witches' hats on or a skeleton mask will knock on your door, holding up little pumpkin buckets out for sweets, and some neighbors will put out some sort of paper gravestones in their windows. You know, they go a little bit with it, but that's about it. Last October 31st, 2022, however, the weirdest thing happened at our home. Our family were all sitting at the front of the TV watching the Exorcist movie when a hammer was at the back door. We all stopped and looked at it, and then looked at each other. To knock at the back door, you would have had to got through a wrought iron side gate which is always firmly locked. The knocking continued, getting louder and more urgent. My grandson, who was 15, got up and went to the kitchen window to investigate. I heard a stifled gasp and went to join him to see what was happening. Despite being a teenager, he is 6 feet tall and does boxing training, so he's no real little weakling. I joined him at the window and asked what was the matter. Face pale and confused, he said a massive bird-like creature had crawled along the lawn and crept into the corner of the garden near the back fencing. He was visibly shaken. The car park to a country park nature trail is at the back of our fence, so I immediately thought some local kids were having a Halloween joke and jumped the wall. Despite it being 8 feet high, I thought maybe they were just pranking us. I told my grandson to tell the rest of the family what we had seen, and I told him I would check it out. He panicked, and I heard him shout to the rest of them still watching TV. He was shaken up at the crawling creature he had thought he had seen, truly. I grabbed a torch and went out into the garden. We have a lot of mature trees, shrubs, and bushes, and at the corner of the garden, I heard a rustling. I pointed the torch toward the noise and walked towards it. There, with its back against the fence, was a bird-like creature about the size of a small child. It was perched on a grassy mound with eagle-like talons for feet, a smooth body, outstretched wings, and a pointy face that resembled a giant rat. I was confused and walked towards it while it looked at me, with its head downwards but eyes looking up at me. It spread its wings and they fluttered like a bird when it was ready to take off. Then there was a prolonged hissing sound. I stopped and looked behind me for backup. I saw a few family members coming out into the garden. The thing gave one last hiss, rose into the air, looking more like a gargoyle than a bird at this point, and disappeared over the fence. It made some of the shrubs waver as it went. My grandson and I described what we had seen, but the rest of them laughed and said it was just our imagination. They admitted to seeing the shrub swaying, but they put it down to a giant kestrel, or something. They didn't believe a word of it. To this day, I do not go into the back garden after dark. That was not a local kid enjoying a Halloween prank, nor was it a visiting kestrel. It looked like a church gargoyle. It's never been back, and I don't want it to return. So this year, if there's a knocking at our back door, my husband or son can investigate this time. I prefer lavender and lilac in my garden over cryptid creatures. Visions of Death by Sam. This story takes place when I was 16 years old. I had just been dropped off at school and I was going to the cafeteria. I went to sit with my best friend, Jack. When I looked at Jack, I saw this creature that resembled a person but was covered in darkness. It had no face or discernible features. He was standing right behind him with his hands on his shoulder, not forcefully, but just like resting. Its head then turned to me and followed me as I approached him. He asked me why I looked so spooked. I told him nothing because he didn't believe in the paranormal. He was a firm Christian, so anything I would have said, he would have just called me crazy. We went throughout the day, and every time I saw him, it was right there with his hands on his shoulder. When I got home, I asked my mom what it could be, or if my great-grandma might know. My mom told me she calls them reapers. They're not necessarily malicious or anything, they just comfort those who are going to die. I broke into tears after hearing this and ran to my room. I ended up passing out, and while I was asleep I had a dream of my friend's point of view. He was in our friend Todd's vehicle, and he looked like he was listening to a speaker in the back seat, not buckled in. Todd crashed into a tree, Jack went through the windshield and snapped his neck, and then I woke up screaming. My mom and sister came in to see if I was okay. I said I was fine and I just had a bad dream. Nothing to worry about. The next day was a Friday and the Reaper followed Jack. I told Jack about my dream, thinking maybe I could warn him about what would happen, but I thought he would just call me crazy. The Reaper looked at me and shook its head. I wonder why it did this. Maybe it was telling me that I couldn't or shouldn't interfere. I ignored that it was there for the rest of the day and went about my business until around 5 p.m. My friend called me and asked if I wanted to go to a party. I said, yeah, just come get me, and we'll go. He told me he had a ride and Todd would be there. I screamed at him, no, don't get in Todd's truck. He told me to chill. He said he was on the way and hung up. So I went on my way to the front porch for him, hoping that my dream wouldn't be real. But after an hour of waiting, my mom got a call and told me what I hoped not to hear. He had died to basically the exact same play-by-play I saw in my dream. I turned around and the Reaper was standing in front of me. It put a hand on my shoulder. I screamed at it to leave me alone, and it just disappeared just as it appeared. I don't know what happened. My dream came true, and it's something I'll always scratch my head about. I don't know what that creature was, if it really was a Reaper, quote-unquote, or some sort of, afterlife messenger, I don't know. But I don't want to find out.
Good evening, and thank you for sharing my story. This encounter still troubles me to this day. It was the summer of 2011. I recently had turned 12 and my family thought it would be a great summer for a cabin trip. Normally, I would have been attending some sort of Boy Scout camp. Since we are from Florida, we drove north to South Carolina with my grandparents coming down from Canada to meet us. The cabin itself was beautiful, with a great view of the lake and its own beachhead. When we first arrived, I was
first out of the car and running around in excitement. I was greeted by a man looking to be in his late 50s, the cabin owner. He smiled at me with happiness, which slowly grew into a nervous grin. Finding it quite odd and being a shy kid, I moved along. As I searched around the area, being curious and wanting to see everything, I noticed almost a circular pit under the house. It was off-putting, but it didn't seem to bother me. Finally, I noticed a treehouse that the owner was building on the beach. As I ran to it, he yelled out, "Watch yourself, son. It's still dangerous." I steamed onwards and climbed up the ladder. The man was correct, as the top there were so many nails poking out all around. But since I was small, I found a place to stand and gaze back at the cabin. The wood cabin seems old but sturdy, with a big porch and outside storage underneath, where once again I stared at the circular pit, which now had my full attention. It was nothing that I've ever seen before, and I don't think I've seen something like it since. I love the woods, and would like to say I am experienced, but it almost looked like a big spinning ball was dipped into the earth. I pointed it out to my father and the owner, who was talking. The owner responded with, "There used to be a bear that nested there, but don't worry, he's long gone." I didn't like his answer, because it seemed strange for how it looked. I brushed it off and went into the cabin, picking up one of the bunk beds before my siblings could. The first few nights were amazing. Lots of hiking and swimming and everyday things that you would do, because we knew when our grandparents arrived, we would be hanging out most of the time. When they did arrive, we sat by the fire at night and enjoyed animal watching. It's important to note the area's geography at this point. The front of the cabin faced a wide strip of dirt leading to the beach with thick trees on either side. To the left of the cabin was the dirt road we used to get to it. Behind and on the left of the cabin were thick, dense woods with a steep slope. Now, it was the 7th night that we were there. I was awoken up by weird sounds outside. Dirt shifting under weight to the left side of the cabin. The trash bins were there next to the door from the kitchen. I heard something pushing them around. Thinking it was most likely raccoons or some sort of interested animal, I should do my Boy Scout duty and shoo them off. I dropped down from my bunk and the noises went silent. I noticed a few rays of sunlight were streaking through the air. I walked over to the kitchen to look out the window, but before I could reach it, suddenly, these long, scratching noises were coming out from against the walls of the cabin. It sounded like long nails, digging deep into the sheets of a bed. Terrified at this point, I slowly back away. Then a bang shook the door and I jumped. Since it was only me, my brother, and my dog who were downstairs, we were the only ones who heard it. Instantly, my dog sprinted to the door, barking and growling viciously like he was about to fight to the death. This woke up my brother, who panicked and grabbed me and pulled out his hunting knife. He looked down at me with reassurance and told me to get to my parents' room. He then pushed me upwards towards the stairs and ran to the door and opened it. He then went away with my dog, the barks and running getting distance as I ran upstairs, and I woke up my father. He ran out into the forest with his Colt 45. About 30 minutes later, they both came back, including my dog, who was limping. I've never seen my brother with the look he had on his face before that day, and he never had that look ever again. He's typically a very brave and capable older brother, and seeing him like that unnerved me to my bone. He was an Eagle Scout, and I was a Boy Scout. We had been in the woods, and we weren't really scared to get dirty. My dog had a stick through his front left leg, but he's a good strong boy and took it like a champ. My mother and grandmother quickly drove our animal over to the local vet. While they were gone, my father, grandfather, and oldest second brother and I looked around the cabin for evidence of this strange event. I was still incredibly nervous, so I kept close to the cabin and my father. The trash bins had gashed holes in them, almost like they had been punched open, and the wall above had deep claw marks in it, which, standing from the level of the trash bins, was about 6 feet into the air. That's when I noticed a smell. An odd smell that wasn't coming from the trash cans. I slowly crouched down between peering underneath the cabin and where this strange pit was. There was a dead fox, shredded into literal pieces. I told my father, and him and my brother quickly cleaned it up by using a shovel and tossing it into a bag and then into the trash. My dad contacted the owner, who assured us that there was nothing to be worried about, but brought us a flare gun and bear mace. A couple of days go by, and my parents take everyone to a restaurant aside from myself, my oldest brother who chased the perpetrator, and my injured but stable dog. An hour after they left, I looked out the second-floor window in the direction where my brother ran a few nights prior. I was petting my dog at the same time. That's when the main encounter took place. My dog raised his head alert and sniffed the air. I glanced out the window and noticed this huge bear-like creature high up in one of the trees. It was matching my level and was staring at me. I say bear-like because it had human-like features, instead of the fat, round body bears usually have. Their body was toned, sharp, and muscular. The eyes were the worst part. They were piercing. They were yellow, almost like perfect human eyes that locked eye contact with me. Fear flooded my brain and forced me into a fight or flight mindset. My dog, picking up on this, started growling and howling at the window. I turned to run out of the room and looked back at the creature, who was now rapidly descending the tree, using its clawed hand to climb. I sprinted to my brother's room in tears, yelling about this beast that I just saw. My brother looked at me with worried eyes and said, "This territory doesn't belong to us." Then he got out of his bed, grabbed his knife and baseball bat, and walked downstairs. I armed myself with a flare gun and bear mace, and prepared myself for the possibility of this thing breaking in and attacking us. A great slam into the back of the wall knocked the cabin around and made it rock like a boat and sent my dog into a frenzy. Between the growls and barks, I could hear heavy breathing from outside and things being thrown at the cabin. A rock broke one of the front windows and striking my left leg. I turned and fired the flare gun out of the window, which was followed by many profanities and yelling. After this, it all stopped. My dog was still growling and pointing at the corner of the room. There was no window facing that direction, so I couldn't see, but I could assume it was right there. A few minutes of silence went by when my brother and I decided to call the police and our parents. Then, being idiots, we walked out of the front door and slowly walked around to the right side of the cabin. We started to hear a slow snarl coming from behind a bush, and my dog inside started going ballistic and jumping at the door. My brother started yelling at this creature and threw his baseball bat towards the bush, striking it. It sounded like it hit a tree, but we both know that we hit the creature because it let out a pained grunt. The black furry mass sprung out from behind the bush and bolted down the dirt road, and we quickly lost sight of it. We hurried back inside the cabin, barricaded the doors, and ran upstairs. We heard gunshots ring out moments later, and my father's truck pulls in. I fly downstairs and open the door. The rest of my family ran inside, and my father claimed a huge bear ran down the road, and he fired a couple of rounds at it. The police eventually came after having a hard time finding the cabin. We gave them the story about this aggressive bear attacking the cabin. We left that night, and my family likes to recall the story of how myself and my oldest brother fended off a hungry bear. But for me and my brother, that was not the case. When we arrived back in Florida, I went straight to my room, still shaken up by what happened. When my brother came in, he looked me dead in the eyes and said, "It looked human, didn't it?" I just nodded and asked him about his territory remark, when he looked down and responded, "Every animal has its territory, and usually can keep it until something bigger comes along and takes it." Well, something bigger came and it took its own territory. What he said still makes me wonder to this day. It's burned into my mind. Looking back on it, the owner was so shaky around me, almost like he knew there was more danger in the area than he was letting on, and that he knew that we would be a target.
This happened to me when I was a teenager. I think it was in the spring of 1998 when I was 14 years old. My Boy Scout troop went hiking in the Ozark Mountains in Arkansas. I grew up in a very small town in Tennessee, and the boys in my troop were people I'd known my entire life. We were all very close and knew each other very, very well, and trusted each other. We had been hiking for 5 days or so at this point, and it was pretty miserable. It rained every single day, and we were all exhausted and sore, and hungry. We were covered with blisters and anything else you can imagine. The adults realized we had bitten off a bit more than we could chew in trying to do a 60-mile trail, especially with the awful weather. So we changed course and had gotten off trail to spend the night in a drive-in campground. The kind of place with hookups for RVs and picnic tables and fire pits and such. There's also a central bathhouse with showers and toilets. It was in a very remote area, far from a town or any other house. There may have been a few other small groups there, but if there were, we never interacted with them or saw any of them. We were all filthy and wet and thus very excited about taking a hot shower. It was dark and we had finished dinner. A group of 5 of my friends, including myself and my friend Jeremy, who like everyone else in our group we had known since we were babies, headed up to the bathhouse, which was maybe a quarter-mile walk through the pitch-dark woods, up a worn-down gravel walking trail. I stayed behind to clean up, and about 10 or 15 minutes later, I followed them by myself. I had a weak little flashlight, the old incandescent kind, pre-LED. I remember the woods were totally silent. When I got about halfway to the bathhouse, I could see the light from it off in the distance through the woods. I heard a noise from my left. I looked over and saw my friend Jeremy standing by an old-school manual water pump about 20 feet off the trail. The kind of pump where you raise and lower a handle to pump up water from a well. There was a strange light behind him, like the moon had come out from behind the clouds. I was startled to see him there by himself in the woods off the trail. I asked him if he was already done with his shower. He seemed kind of, sad. He said, "Yeah, it's all yours." I said okay and didn't think much of it until I got to the bathhouse. When I walked in the door, my friends were all in there and I heard Jeremy talking in from the shower. All the blood drained out of my head, and all the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I had to sit down before I passed out. My friends were freaked out and wanted to know what was wrong. I told them exactly what happened. They nervously made jokes about how I must have been smoking pot. This was long before any of us had experienced with any kind of mind-altering substances, but I could tell that they believed me. Like I said, we had known each other forever, and we knew that we wouldn't exaggerate or play a joke on each other like this, at least not to this extent. I was physically shaking. It was almost impossible for this to be a joke. We all waited together until everyone was finished showering and brushing teeth and whatnot. Then we all walked back together in total silence. When we got to the spot, whoever I had seen was gone without a trace. The water pump was there, though. No one had noticed it before because it was way off the trail and obviously not in use. We got back to our campsite and went to bed thoroughly freaked out. I remember not sleeping much that night. In all my years since then, I've never been able to figure out what happened. Was there a random teenage boy in the woods who looked just like my friend? This is unlikely. Did I hallucinate? Unlikely, but possible. Who's to say? I was in the Boy Scouts as a kid in the South Carolina Lowcountry. We'd go on campouts about once a month, and one of the campouts that we used to go to regularly belonged to a local man who owned some land way out in the country and let our troop use it for camping. The actual campsite was in a wooded area in the center of a big open field that was maybe 20 acres or so. The guy who owned the land wasn't a full-time farmer, so he had plowed the field but never really planted anything, and the dirt was kind of settled and scrubby, and grass had started to grow. I'm not really sure, I'm not a farmer, maybe there's a name for that or something. Anyway, the western edge of the field was a dirt road that eventually led to the highway. The northern edge was an old field that was planted with trees along enough to go where the trees were fully grown. And it was basically a forest. The southern part used to be a forest, but it was now in the process of being turned into farmland. The trees had all been torn down, but not removed quite yet, so it was just a wasteland of fallen tree trunks and roots. The eastern edge was a swamp, and there's some nasty stuff in swamps in South Carolina, so we never really explored it too much. One night, after the post-dinner cleanup, everyone was kind of settling down for the night, so a few friends and I decided to go for a walk. There was a lone tree out in the field about halfway between the campsite and the western edge of the big field, so we walked out and sat under it. There was a full moon out, and the whole field was lit in this sort of luminescent type of glow, and we could see the edges of the field, but not into the forest, swamp, or whatever was beyond. It was creepy but kind of cool. We hung out for a while, just kind of talking, and then we could see lights in our campsite across the field going out as people started to go to sleep. So we decided to head back. We got up and started walking, and I heard one of my friends say, "Who's that?" We all turned to look, and there's this guy standing perfectly still about 100 feet away from us. We could see his silhouette very well thanks to the full moon, but it was too dark to make out any details of his face. We hadn't seen anyone come from the campsite, but the guy looked like an adult, so we assumed one of the 4 adults who had been on the trip with us was out looking for us. My friend called out to him, and then, this is where it gets really weird. Something that looked kind of like wings slowly unfolded from this guy's head, and he remained entirely still. He let out this long, low growling and hooting sound. Like, imagine if a guy was trying to sound like a dog that was trying to imitate an owl. We all took off running towards the campsite as fast as we could and did not stop until we got there. I looked back out into the field to see if we were being followed, but it was empty. There was nothing in the field at all. We walked around the campsite trying to figure out which adult was messing with us, but they were all in their tents and nobody had left the campsite. Nobody believed us, of course. They just assumed we had been out telling scary stories and freaked ourselves out. But I know what I saw. No, actually I don't know what I saw, but I know it was nothing that we had brought out there with us.
No More Camping by Draven. My name is Draven. It's 2 a.m. at the time of writing this, which is keeping me up. So I'm telling somebody, hoping it will take my mind off of it. I live in Idaho, but at the time of the incident, I was living in Alaska, about 16 miles southwest of Fairbanks. I lived in the middle of a forest. I loved the woods. That's why I moved out here. I was big on camping. I would always be in a tent with Barkley, my 2-year-old German Shepherd. I didn't have a good week, so I went camping to try to take a load off. We went to our favorite spot next to a lake about 7 miles from the house. Instead of taking the car, we decided to jog. I grabbed my gear, Barkley's harness, and leash, and left. I was a wildland firefighter, so flying with weight was easy. It took around 2 hours. Once I got there, I first set up camp, and then we went upstream to cast a line to see if we could catch anything. I caught a rainbow trout. When I got to the camp, the tent collapsed. If you have ever set up a tent, you know they don't just collapse. You have to take the tent pole out in the hole and take every corner out for it to go down. I thought this was weird, so I set it up again and got the campfire going. I cooked the rainbow trout, and it was honestly delicious. After that, I cooked some marshmallows. Not s'mores, just plain marshmallows. I don't really like that other stuff. I put the fire out, went into the tent with Barkley, and I found the sound of nature always knocked me out. I woke up sometime in the middle of the night to Barkley growling. At first, I was annoyed with him, but then I realized that the forest was dead silent other than Barkley. I grabbed my backpack and grabbed my 9mm out of it because we all know one thing. If the forest is quiet, something is out there. I sat there with my gun for a couple of minutes. It honestly felt like an hour. Then I heard the sound that still freaked me out. It sounded like a caribou, but was lower and kind of gargling. I heard a stick break like it was stepped on, and that it was very close to the tent. I fired a warning shot in the air. It seemingly scared whatever was out there off. I felt it was fine until I realized the forest noises were still silent. I'm 6'3" and I tried to be scary, so I yelled from my gut, "If you come back, I will shoot you." And it came back. It touched the tent. It was like whatever this was taunting me. I fired at it, and it ran off into the forest, and suddenly all the noises came back again. I stayed, But the moment dawn came, I packed up, got Barkley's harness on, and got the heck out of there. We sprinted 2 miles and jogged the rest. I don't know what I encountered, but I'm happy it played out the way it did, and not the other way around. The Beast in Montana by Trailside Horror. I live in Montana on a small 20-acre ranch with my parents, my 3 sisters, my twin. My twin's name is Sky. My second oldest sister, who is also part of the story's name is Jess. I loved going on night trail rides, just at dusk. We had done this many times, so we knew these trails very well. We got our horses and set off. We were getting tacked up and ready to go and made sure we had a flashlight with us. We had reflecting bright yellow coat things, so we mounted up and started off. By this time, the sun was setting and the moon was just over half full, but we could see just fine. We decided to take a roundabout trail from the barn through a big forest and back to the barn. Sky was in front, I was in the middle, and Jess was in the back. A little way in, we heard a stick break. We didn't think too much of it, as we thought it was a deer or something along those lines. But a ways down, we heard one closer. We paid attention and noticed there was absolutely no noise around us. It was utterly silent. The horses began to act uneasy and skittish. They wouldn't stand still and kept stepping to the side, looking around. Their ears were pricked up. Then we heard a shrill, demonic-sounding scream just to our left. The horses bolted, losing their minds. And we let them as we were scared absolutely crapless. We heard heavy pounding steps behind us. The horses were going about 25 miles an hour and were gaining speed. The footsteps grew closer. Though I had turned my head around, the moonlight showed a long, skinny, bony creature with white eyes. And it was, I can't even explain it, horrifying to look at. We turned and had just about reached a barn where it was well lit. The horses kept bolting and didn't slow down until we were just a few feet away. But as soon as we did, the steps had just stopped. We turned to look and saw the small white circles of its eyes. We dismounted, entered the barn, and locked the door. We were freaking the heck out. Our parents were out of town, and our older sister was in her room in the center of the house. None of us had our phones. We waited until it was morning. We stayed up all night scared that if we left, it would get us. So we waited until we saw the sun. We quickly left, running to the house and told our sister, and called our parents telling them, but they didn't believe us. I'm worried it might hurt our horses or other livestock. If anyone knows what this creature is, please let me know in the comments. I'd love to learn more and get an understanding of it. Bigfoot in the Bayou by Robert. Hello, I'm Robert and I live in Northeast Louisiana. A few weeks ago, my friends Drew, Gregory, and Jolene visited some of my family in Washington State. Drew and I are 18 and Gregory and Jolene are 19. We packed all our stuff in late October and drove from Louisiana to Washington. We stayed for a few days, visiting my uncle and his small family. Then, Gregory suggested we camp in the nearby woods on our last night. Drew and Jolene agreed, but I needed to be more open. I don't know why. A million different thoughts ran through my head at once. In the end, I agreed. We borrowed 2 tents from my uncle and camped in the woods near his house. Now, to be honest, this was hardly camping. If we unzipped our tents, we could see the porch light, but just barely. That's how far away from the house we were. Also, he had no neighbors for at least 3 or 4 miles. After chilling by the fire we built, we decided to call it a night, except for Jolene, who chose to stay up a little bit longer. I figured I would stay up with her. We stayed there talking for about 20 minutes until we saw something absolutely massive stalking around. The thing is this thing was so massive it almost seemed like it was silent. It was about 20 yards away, and it seemed to be about 10 foot tall. We both got nervous and got in one of the tents. We woke Gregory, who quietly said, "What the heck's going on?" Still half asleep. Gregory grabbed his hatchet, got up on one knee. Jolene tried to explain what we saw, but it made no sense to him. "Go back to sleep, y'all," Gregory said, putting his hatchet down and snuggling back into a sleeping bag. After about 20 minutes, we heard the thing walking around our tent again. At this point, Gregory was out like a light. I grabbed Gregory's hatchet and put my hand over Jolene's mouth to keep her from screaming. We suddenly realized we had left Drew alone in his tent, with nothing to defend himself. Jolene volunteered to step outside with the hatchet. She jumped right back in as soon as she jumped out. She wouldn't stop breathing so heavily. I asked her what she saw. She said she didn't know. It's just something vast and solid, black in color. I grabbed the hatchet and stepped outside the tent to see it for myself. Whatever this thing was giant. It was looking down at our tent, and I just about peed myself right then and there. I swung the hatchet at whatever this thing was. Out of fear, I heard it scream out in pain. It ran off, and I was relieved for the moment. The scream woke Drew and Gregory asked what it was. But before any of us could speak a word, he looked down and saw the massive big footprints in the deep mud. Drew looked down at them and whispered, "Bigfoot?" My cousin came running with a pistol and a lantern in hand. "What the hell was that?" she yelled. Gregory pointed at the footprints. "I ain't never going camping without a gun ever again," he said with a grit in his voice. I couldn't sleep again until we returned to Louisiana. One creepy night for sure that I'll never forget.
Okay, so I'm a 31-year-old trucker, and you can call me Diego for privacy reasons. I come from a trucking family, and all of my cousins and uncles who drive big rigs down in Mexico have tons of paranormal trucking stories, as Mexico is very rich in paranormal activity. On the other hand, I don't have many stories. That is until today, at least related to trucking, that is. I am writing this a few hours after this has happened, so it's still fresh on my mind, even though I doubt I'll ever forget today's events. So my run is mainly a trip from southeastern Wisconsin to southern Michigan and back. Now for context, once I enter Michigan, I get from the interstate and get on a rural country road, as my company prefers that we avoid toll roads to cut down on cost. They say the less we spend on tolls, the more we can pay our drivers. Anyway, on my way there, all is normal and everything is going well. I get to our drop yard and drop my loaded trailer for the following driver to take it to its final location. I look at my tablet and figure out what load I'm taking back with me. I hook up to the trailer and do my pre-trip inspection. Everything seems reasonable. I grab the paperwork for the load from the box in the front of the trailer and look through it. My company requires all shipments over a certain weight to be thoroughly looked at and certified on a scale to make sure the load is legal and not over the legal regulation weight. Well, I looked at the scale receipt and this one was not, so I contacted my company, and they instructed me to grab one of the 4 empty trailers and take that back to southeastern Wisconsin. This will be important later in the story. I walk in front of the trailers and slap each one until I hear that distinctive hollow sound indicating that it's empty. I do this to save time and not have to walk behind and open every single trailer. Once I found one that sounded like it might be empty, I grabbed my flashlight and started to do my pre-trip inspection on that trailer, making sure there weren't any flat tires and all the lights worked, etc. I walked to the back to open the trailer, shining my light in there to make sure it's empty, which it was, and surprisingly it was even swept out by the last driver, which is rare. Once all that was done, I turned on the Swamp Dweller podcast and returned to the road. About 45 minutes into my trip, I'm driving down the country road with my high beams on at least around 2 a.m., and there were no other people on the road. As a matter of fact, I have woods on both sides of the road. This is where things get a little weird. I forgot to mention that there is an electrical storm, but there is no rain and you can't hear any thunder. I know this because I always ride with my window down. Anyway, the lightning lights up the sky every couple of seconds, and I admire how beautiful it lights up everything around me. As I come around a bend on the road in the distance, I see a person walking on the shoulder of the road, and as I approach him, he turns and waves as if to say hello. The person was a man,
He was wearing a hard hat with neon green pants and a reflective vest of the same color. That is why I saw him from a reasonable distance away, but there was no construction anywhere in sight, before or beyond this point. And I know this because I passed through there on my way to my previous destination. As I got past him, I pressed on my brakes to illuminate the road behind me. At the same time, lightning struck up and lit up the area. I'm staring in my mirror, and this guy is gone. In a split second, he disappeared. I thought that was very weird, but I got over it and focused back on the road. About 3 minutes down the road, I hear 3 loud knocks on my trailer. I turn my radio down and I try to listen closer, but I hear nothing after that and think that it must have just been a bump that I hit in the road. About 5 minutes later, I hear 5 loud knocks, again on my trailer, and think it's very weird. Now, I drive like this every single day and I'm used to it, so I wasn't tired or sleepy. I was wide awake, so I can't blame it on that. I turn down my radio and keep it off at this point and try to listen. A couple of minutes later, I hear 5 more very rapid hard knocks in my trailer again. As I've said, I always knock on the trailers to see if they are empty or loaded, and I recognize the sound quite well. So now I'm worried that I missed something when I checked the inside of the trailer. So I decided to pull over to the side of the road and open the trailer and check what was in there. As I slowed down and pulled over about a second later, maybe 25 feet in front of my truck, I see a huge tree fall on the road. At this point, I got scared because it wasn't struck by lightning and there was no wind. I put my truck into gear and took off because, as I said, I was listening to Swamp Dweller before that, and I was already on edge. My initial thought was, whatever pushed over that tree, I don't want to stick around and meet it. So I drove around on the side of oncoming traffic, which there was none at that time of night, thank God, and went around the tree. I pulled into the next truck stop and decided to find out what the hell was in my trailer. I grabbed my flashlight and go to check. I open the door and shine my light and, well, there is absolutely nothing or anyone in there. I get back in my truck and start driving. I don't honestly know what to do. Giving it some thought, I realized that even though I saw that man out on the side of the road as clear as day, I couldn't see his face. And as I said, when I looked back, he had disappeared. And those knocks on my trailer were getting faster and louder every time, as if it was some sort of sense of urgency, as if they wanted me to stop my truck. And if I didn't stop when I did, I might have been killed by that tree. At this point, I believe it was a spirit trying to stop me so the tree wouldn't smash my truck. Well, after that, when I got back to driving, I didn't hear the knocking anymore until I got to my destination, at which point I unhooked from the trailer and proceeded to do my post-trip inspection. And again, there was nothing or anyone in the trailer. So, I don't really know. I guess, thank you to the spirit for saving my life potentially. And, yeah, I don't really know what to say. This story scared the daylights out of me. Thank you for sharing my story if you do, Swamp Dweller. I'm a big fan of the show.
Deer Monster on the Highway by Anonymous. As I drove down this deserted highway in the dead of night, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The darkness seemed to be closing in all around me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. Out of nowhere, a flash of movement caught my eye in the distance. At first, I thought it was just a deer crossing the road, but as it got closer, I realized it was something much more sinister. The creature looked like a deer, but it was much larger than any deer I had ever come across before in my lifetime. Its eyes glowed an unnatural light, and its antlers twisted and turned in ways that defied all reason. As the creature charged towards my car, I hit the gas pedal and tried to speed away. But no matter how fast I went, the monster seemed to keep up with ease, its twisted antlers scraping against the sides of my vehicles from time to time, sending absolute shivers down my spine. Panic set in as I realized that there was no escaping this creature. I tried to turn off onto a side road to lose it, but it was no use. The creature was right behind me no matter how much I bobbed and weaved, breathing hot breath on the back of my neck. As I looked in the rearview mirror, I could see the creature's glowing eyes staring back at me, and I swear this thing had a twisted smile on its monstrous face. I knew that no hope was left. I was trapped with no way out.
In that exact moment, I could only pray for a quick end to my nightmare as the deer monster closed in on me with terrifying speed. The last thing I heard was the sound of its twisted antlers scraping up against the metal of my car as the world around me faded to black. The next morning, I woke up in a hospital, and I had no idea how I got there. But apparently, first responders got to me after somebody called it in, and I had been saved just in the nick of time. All that was noticed or found at the scene was a small strip of deer fur. I work emergency on the weekends at a very large veterinary hospital. My shift begins at 5 a.m. and I leave the house at 4:15 a.m. Although I live in a very large Midwestern city, it is always a drive-in on Sunday mornings. Very few of the city folk are out at that time. Many of them have gone to bed as it is for the weekend. That doesn't normally bother me at all. The streets are always crowded during the day, and it's a nice respite from the normal gridlock. It was a Sunday, March 28th, 2020. I remember the date exactly as it was the day after the state government had issued a shelter-in-place response to the COVID outbreak. Because I worked in the veterinary medical field at an ER hospital, I was deemed essential and my routine carried on as normal. Usually at around 3 a.m. the alarm began making its annoying bonging sound, waking me up from my restful sleep. I started getting ready for work. There were dogs to feed and let out, lunch to be packed and coffee to be made. It was a typical Sunday morning before work. I left at my usual time and noticed that the roads were even quieter than normal. There was virtually no one out besides me and the occasional police vehicle, to the point of it being surreal. As I make my way to work on the quiet streets, I came to a divided highway with 2 lanes of traffic going each way. The speed limit on that road is 45 miles per hour. Not that anyone obeys the law. However, it was dark out and frankly I was enjoying having the world to myself, so I was driving the speed limit that day. As I'm driving down the right lane of the road, it barely registers to me, but it seems darker than it normally is at the time. I didn't put that much thought into it that until suddenly, almost like someone placed a thought in my head, I thought a dog was in the road in front of me at the far distance. I squinted my eyes and investigated the darkness in front of me and didn't see anything, so I ignored the thought and continued driving down the right lane. But then the distinct thought that a dog was in the lane before me blasted back into my head. I ignored this warning no longer and quickly merged to the left lane. Just as I accomplished this, I looked at the right of the road. A man was walking steadily down the middle of the street, right towards me. As I passed him going 40 miles per hour in the lane to his left, I looked over, and he looked at me. He just continued his slow and steady walk down the road. My first thought was to thank God that I did not hit him. Then I became so grateful that I paid attention to the voice in my head. But then I realized how strange the situation was. There are sidewalks and frontage roads off this road. Plenty of places to walk and not be in the way. Why would he be walking down in the middle of the road in the highway? Why did I keep thinking that a dog was on the road when I saw nothing? I kept glancing back in my rear view mirror as I continued to drive and saw no one. It was as if he just faded away or perhaps was entirely shrouded by the strange and new eerie darkness. What happened next was entirely out of character for me. I usually think about situations like this repeatedly, meditating on them, dwelling if you will. But as I kept driving, the whole event just faded out of my memory. I can only compare it to a dream when somebody wakes up with a vague recollection of what went down, and then it just wanes away as the day goes by. A couple of days later, I suddenly recalled the incident and began thinking of how strange it was. As I drove to work the following weekend at the same time, I paid careful attention to that section of the highway in particular where I saw the man walking. It immediately struck me that I could see if a figure had been walking there in the distance. The lights from the surrounding businesses and streetlights made it possible. It seemed much lighter that morning, although it was the same time of day with similar weather. Why had it been so dark that weekend before? A few months later, I was at work and a client came in and observed that her last name was the same as the name on the road I had been driving down the morning of the strange occurrence. I asked her if she somehow was related to that road. She told me that her in-laws used to own the land where the road was built. I casually, jokingly told her I saw a ghost on that road or something else extraordinary. She immediately became very interested. She told me that her mother-in-law had stories of strange events on that property before it was sold. I'm not sure who that man was that night. I have no idea why it was so dark or why the whole occurrence faded after it occurred. I continue to be grateful to whoever warned me to pull over and helped me not hit that person. Deep down inside though, I knew that some good versus evil was occurring that morning, and I was being put to the spiritual test. And although I don't understand any of it, I'm glad I listened to that voice. When I was 12, I attended summer camp to learn how to ride horses. We were going to be away from our parents for 4 or 5 nights. I was excited because I always wanted to learn how to ride a horse due to my love for animals. But I also was nervous about being away from my family and being around strangers for that long. Most of it was amazing, and everything I dreamed of. However, the one night labeled Sleep Under the Stars is an experience that I don't think I'll ever forget. That night, we had to leave our bunks and go outside to sleep in tents. I hated tents, but everyone else was doing it, so I figured I'd play along. There were a lot of activities that took place before bed. We sat by a campfire, made s'mores, and told stories. When it came time for bed, it was 4 of us to a tent, and I could already tell it wasn't going to be fun and I was not going to get much sleep. I just could not get comfortable and was wishing it was morning. The other people in my tent seemed to pass out almost immediately, which left me sitting there trying to count sheep in the dark. There were a lot of tents in a small area since everyone in the camp was sleeping outside for one night. I was starting to get a little drowsy when I hear what sounded like footsteps outside of the tent. I was right near the mesh window of the tent because I tended to get hot and was hoping the cool breeze would help me sleep. The footsteps then got louder, but I tried to ignore them, presuming it was a counselor or one of the camp leaders. But then I felt a presence right over my tent. It was like someone was kneeling right outside the mesh window. I gathered the courage to look outside, and there was something out there. I didn't look long enough to see what it was, but there was definitely something there. It was silent at first, but then I heard whispering. Just mumbling and whispering for minutes and minutes without break. I couldn't really make out the words because it was so soft, but I could hear something. I thought I could hear the words, Savior, sacrifice, wept. I felt like I heard the words wept a lot, but like I said, I couldn't really make it out. Every so often, it would stop, and I would peek my head out of the sleeping bag to check and see if someone was there. The figure was always still there, right outside the mesh window. On and off, I could hear the whispering and mumbling all night. I tried several times to kick or punch someone in my tent to wake them up, but it never worked. Eventually, during one of the moments of silence, I must have dozed off. As scared as I was, I have no clue how I was able to fall asleep or even get any sort of sleep, even if it was briefly. I checked the window again, and there was nothing there. About 5 minutes later, I heard a loud shriek and a gust of wind. When I woke up the next morning, I asked everyone if they heard or experienced anything like I did that night. No one apparently saw or heard anything other than me. I know I wasn't asleep, and that I absolutely saw and heard things that night. I don't want to say it wasn't human, because nothing gave me that idea. But what type of person would have knelt by our tent and mumbled under their breath the entire night? As scared as I was at the time, I'm glad I never had another experience like that again. I live in Burlington, Ontario, a nice lakeside city near Toronto. This story happened to me during a school trip when I was in 8th grade. It was like a summer camp thing. We were in elementary school, which was kind of like a Catholic school. Everyone in grade 8 would get to go on 2 trips as part of their final year at the school. One trip took place in, I believe, fall. It was usually a religious camping trip that took place about 40 minutes out of the city. By religious, I mean everyone had to participate in group activities that revolved around being a good Christian and teamwork, etc. This, of course, completely sucked as this camp was little more than just a religion class stretched into 3 days.
The second school trip always took place in the spring and was usually a trip to Ottawa for the weekend, where we would explore the city and visit museums. For some reason, it was decided my year we would take another camping trip instead of going to the city. We would go about 4 hours away to the Algonquin Provincial Park. The camp was on one of the many lakes in the park and was set up like your typical summer camp. Cabins were spread out near the lake and partially in the forest. There were also bathrooms and a mess hall in separate buildings. Also, just to explain, if you don't know what a provincial park is, it's very much like a state or a national park in the United States. As you would guess, boys and girls shared separate cabins. The girls' cabins were built on supports above the ground and were the ones closer to the lake. Our cabins were almost in the forest and built on the ground along a gravel road. I shared a larger cabin with about 4 other guys. Although our cabin was the largest, it was probably the least comforting. While the other cabins had actual windows and doors that would fully close and lock, our cabin looked like it was built from balsa wood, only had thin bug screens for windows and a door that would not close. I should also point out that I had no experience with actual camping, as my family actually hates it, so this was a bad first impression. This is where the creepy story begins. On the first evening, we were all gathered outside the mess hall for a fun night activity. The camp counselors told us about a hermit that lived nearby in the woods. The activity was that they were going to take us to the dark woods in groups to see where this hermit lived. This kind of caught us by surprise as it was quite random, but intriguing at the same time. As you would expect, everyone was pretty much screaming as we were led deeper into the woods with only our flashlights, looking for this hermit's house. When we finally came across this house, which was little more than just a huge log with a makeshift bed, we were led back to the camp. Although my group didn't see anything, other people started talking about seeing someone creep around the dark woods. Someone in my cabin even said they saw blue glowing eyes in the darkness. I shrugged it off, thinking the whole hermit story was made up by the camp to scare us. The person in the woods was just a counselor. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of someone sprinting down the gravel road that ran to our cabin. At first, I was startled and a little creeped out, but then I thought it might have been just an animal. That was until I started hearing the gravel crunch around our cabin. It was very soft, but a person. I was suddenly terrified. My bed was right beside the door and it did not lock. An animal could have easily pushed the door open on its own and walked inside if it wanted to. There was also nothing covering the screens, so the person outside could easily see in. I was ready to scream as loud as possible if someone entered the cabin. I had my eyes locked on the door, anticipating seeing it slowly open, but it never did. The sound outside slowly disappeared into the woods. Immediately, I thought it must have been the hermit. I ruled out the possibility of it being a counselor or a teacher because it was at least 3 in the morning, which was an odd time to check on students. Surprisingly, I was able to fall asleep a short while after. The only interesting part of the camp trip, unfortunately, was this part. The rest of the trip was dreadful. It rained non-stop for the remaining days, and people from my class caught the flu from another school that was sharing the camp with us, so the bus was partially quarantined on the way back home. As time passed, I almost forgot about the creepy encounter, giving it to the possibility that it was just a counselor checking in on us. The story doesn't end there, though. The following year, it was my younger sister's turn to go on the same 8th grade camping trip. Just like for my class, she also had to go into the weird hermit expedition during the first night. Although she initially thought nothing of it, during one of the other days, she and a few of her friends were exploring the woods along the lake. She described seeing a small hermit-like person sitting on a log in the distance. I know this isn't the creepiest summer camp story to ever be told, but it creeps me out knowing that that hermit was actually real, and this camp that I thought was fun and was leading a bunch of children to this random guy's house in the middle of the woods was not so fun.